Have you ever witnessed a moment of pure compassion that made your heart skip a beat? A homeless woman's tender care for a crying little girl captivated a billionaire father, creating an unexpected connection that would blossom into a love story neither of them ever imagined possible. The bitter December wind swept through the canyons of Manhattan's skyscrapers, carrying with it the first snowflakes of winter. Alexander Pierce stood at his office window on the 54th floor, watching the city transform into a winter wonderland. As CEO of Pierce Enterprises, one of the largest financial empires in the country, he had everything a man could want, except time. Time was the one commodity his billions couldn't buy, especially for his daughter, Emma. His assistant's voice came through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Pierce, your daughter's school just called. Emma had another episode. The nurse says you need to pick her up immediately." Alexander closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping with the weight of failure. Since his wife Caroline's death 2 years ago, Emma's anxiety attacks had become more frequent. 6 years old and already carrying so much pain. "Tell Jenkins to get the car ready," he replied, already reaching for his coat. 30 minutes later, Alexander stood in the nurse's office, his expensive Italian leather shoes soaked from the snow. Emma sat on a small plastic chair, her face pale and tear-streaked, her small body still trembling from the aftermath of her panic attack. "She was fine during morning classes," the nurse explained quietly. "But during lunch, she just broke down, started crying about her mother and couldn't stop." Alexander nodded, the familiar guilt tightening his chest. Today marked exactly 2 years since Caroline's accident. He'd been so busy with the Henderson merger that he'd forgotten what day it was. What kind of father forgets the anniversary of his wife's death? "Come on, princess," he said gently, kneeling in front of Emma. Her golden curls, so like her mother's, hung limply around her face. "Let's go home." Emma nodded silently, her blue eyes vacant in a way that terrified him. She'd been seeing the best child psychologists in the country, but the grief was still overwhelming her small heart. As they stepped outside the school, Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, Caroline's last gift to her, and whispered, "Can we go to the park? Mommy's park?" Alexander hesitated. He had 3 conference calls scheduled that afternoon, all crucial for the merger. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his executive team wondering where he was. But looking at Emma's pleading eyes, he knew there was only one answer. "Of course, sweetheart. Jenkins, take us to Central Park," he instructed his driver. 20 minutes later, they walked hand in hand through the snow-dusted paths of Central Park. This had been Caroline's favorite place in the city. They'd had their first date here, he'd proposed here, and they'd brought newborn Emma here to see her first snowfall. Emma walked beside him silently, occasionally stopping to watch the snowflakes land on her mittens. Alexander's phone continued to buzz insistently, but he ignored it. This was more important. He had to be present for his daughter. "Daddy, I'm thirsty," Emma said suddenly, her voice small but steadier than before. Alexander spotted a hot chocolate vendor nearby. "Wait right here on this bench, princess. I'll get us something warm to drink, okay? Don't move." Emma nodded, clutching her rabbit tighter as she sat on the bench. Alexander hurried to the vendor, relieved to see his daughter sitting calmly. Maybe this outing was helping after all. While waiting in line, he quickly checked his phone. 12 missed calls and 23 messages. The Henderson deal was falling apart. His chief financial officer was panicking, demanding immediate action. Alexander felt his stomach twist with anxiety. This merger represented millions in potential profits and hundreds of jobs. He dialed his CFO while keeping his eyes on Emma. "Tom, what's happening?" "Henderson is backing out. He says the Japanese investors are getting cold feet and—" "Calm down. Have you reminded them about the tax incentives in the third quarter projections?" While Alexander became absorbed in damage control, he didn't notice the group of rowdy teenagers that passed by Emma's bench. accidentally knocking her stuffed rabbit into a slush puddle. He didn't see Emma's face crumple as she scrambled to rescue her precious memento, now soaked and dirty. He didn't see her small body begin to shake with sobs. But someone else did. Sarah Walker had been homeless for almost 8 months now. At 32, she'd never imagined herself living on the streets of New York. But life had a cruel way of dismantling even the most carefully constructed plans. The medical bills from her mother's cancer had drained her savings, and then the publishing house where she'd worked as an editor for 6 years had downsized. Without income, her apartment had followed, and then her car, and finally, her dignity. Now she spent her days in the relative warmth of Central Park, reading discarded books and trying to keep herself presentable enough that the police wouldn't hassle her. The old bench near the children's playground had become her unofficial spot, and that's where she was heading when she noticed the little girl in the expensive red coat, crying as if her heart would break. Sarah hesitated. People didn't look kindly on homeless individuals approaching children, but something about the girl's devastation pulled at her heart. She approached slowly, making sure to stay a respectful distance away. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Emma looked up, her face streaked with tears, clutching a soaking wet stuffed rabbit. My bunny," she hiccuped. Rosie is ruined." Sarah glanced around, wondering where the child's parents were. She spotted a man in an expensive suit at the hot chocolate stand, engrossed in what appeared to be an intense phone call. Typical New Yorker, she thought, too busy for what really matters. "May I see Rosie?" Sarah asked, sitting on the far end of the bench. When Emma hesitantly held out the sodden rabbit, Sarah smiled reassuringly. "You know, I used to fix stuffed animals all the time. Rosie's not ruined, she just needs a little help." From her weathered backpack, containing everything she owned in the world, Sarah pulled out a clean handkerchief, one of the few remnants of her former life. She gently began to dry the rabbit, her movements deliberate and tender. "My mommy gave me Rosie," Emma whispered, her sobs subsiding as she watched Sarah work. "Before she went to heaven." Sarah's hands stilled for a moment as understanding dawned. "Then Rosie is very special indeed," she said softly. "We'll make her all better, I promise." As Sarah continued to clean the stuffed animal, she began to tell Emma a story about a brave little rabbit who protected a princess through all sorts of adventures. The story flowed effortlessly, remnants of the children's book Sarah had been writing before her life fell apart. Emma's eyes widened, her tears forgotten as she became absorbed in the tale. Alexander finally ended his call, having temporarily salvaged the Henderson situation. He grabbed the hot chocolates and turned back toward Emma, only to freeze in horror. A homeless woman was sitting next to his daughter, touching Emma's precious rabbit. His heart lurched with fear and anger as he rushed toward them. "Emma!" he called sharply. "Get away from her!" But as he got closer, he realized Emma wasn't frightened or distressed. She was smiling, actually smiling, for the first time in months. The homeless woman was telling her some sort of story while carefully cleaning Rosie with what looked like a surprisingly clean handkerchief. "And so the rabbit princess used her magic carrot to turn the mean wolf into a butterfly," the woman was saying, making Emma giggle. Alexander slowed his approach, confusion replacing his panic. The woman looked up at him, and he was struck by her eyes, a clear, intelligent gray that seemed at odds with her ragged appearance. Despite her worn clothes and unwashed hair, there was an unmistakable dignity in her posture. "Your daughter is delightful," she said simply, handing the now cleaner rabbit back to Emma. "Rosie had a little accident, but she's feeling much better now." "Daddy," Emma said excitedly, "this is Miss Sarah. She saved Rosie when she fell in the yucky water, and she knows the best stories about rabbit princesses." Alexander stood speechless, the hot chocolates cooling in his hands. Up close, he could see that the woman, Sarah, was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her early 30s. Though thin and weathered, her face held a gentleness that had clearly won his daughter's trust. "Thank you," he said finally. his voice gruff with unexpected emotion. The sight of Emma's smile, so rare these days, had caught him off guard. Sarah stood, shouldering her worn backpack. "No need to thank me. Your daughter is a special girl." She turned to Emma with a small bow. "Thank you for letting me meet Rosie, Princess Emma. Remember, she's brave and so are you." As Sarah turned to leave, Emma suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. "Don't go! Daddy got hot chocolate. You can have mine. I don't mind sharing." Alexander watched as Sarah's expression softened with something like longing before she carefully extracted her hand. "That's very kind, but I should be on my way. Please," Alexander heard himself saying, surprising even himself. "Join us. It's the least I can do after you helped Emma." Sarah hesitated, her eyes wary as they assessed him. For a moment, Alexander saw himself as she must see him, an arrogant businessman who'd been too busy on his phone to notice his own daughter's distress. He felt ashamed. "Just for a few minutes," Sarah finally agreed, seemingly more for Emma's sake than his. They sat together on the bench, an unlikely trio in the falling snow, the billionaire, his broken-hearted daughter, and the homeless woman who had shown more compassion in 5 minutes than he had all day. As Emma chattered happily to Sarah about her school and her rabbit, Alexander observed the gentle way the woman listened, giving Emma her full attention. When had he last done that? Really listened to his daughter without one eye on his phone or his mind on work problems? Emma began to yawn, the emotional exhaustion of the day catching up with her. Alexander checked his watch. They'd been sitting there for almost an hour, and he hadn't checked his phone once. It felt strangely liberating. "We should be heading home," he said reluctantly. "It's getting cold and Emma needs her rest." Sarah nodded, standing once again. "Of course. Thank you for the hot chocolate." "Will you be here tomorrow?" Emma asked, clutching Rosie to her chest. "I want to know what happens next in the Rabbit Princess story." Sarah glanced at Alexander, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't think—" "Please come back tomorrow," Alexander interrupted, surprising himself again. "Emma would love it and—" He hesitated. "I'd like to repay your kindness properly." Sarah's expression closed slightly. "I don't need charity, Mr. Pierce, Alexander Pierce, and it's not charity, it's gratitude." He reached for his wallet, but Sarah shook her head firmly. "Keep your money," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Some things aren't about money, Mr. Pierce." With that, she turned and walked away, her slender figure soon disappearing among the trees as the snow fell more heavily. Alexander stood watching the spot where she'd vanished, feeling as though something important had just happened, though he couldn't quite define what. "Daddy," Emma said, slipping her small hand into his. "Miss Sarah is an angel, isn't she? Like Mommy sent her to help us." Alexander squeezed his daughter's hand, his throat tight with emotion. "Maybe she did, Princess. Maybe she did." As they walked back to where Jenkins waited with the car, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's gray eyes and the gentle way she'd cared for Emma's rabbit, and Emma's heart. In that simple act of compassion, she'd connected with his daughter in a way that all the expensive therapists hadn't been able to. He had to find her again. Not just for Emma, but because for the first time since Caroline died, he'd felt something stir in his frozen heart, something he thought had died along with his wife. That evening, as Alexander tucked Emma into bed, he was struck by the change in his daughter. For the first time in months, she was animated, talking excitedly about Sarah and the Rabbit Princess story. And then, Daddy, the Rabbit Princess used her special carrot wand to make a bridge across the river of chocolate. Emma's eyes sparkled as she hugged Rosie, now dried and resting on her pillow. "Miss Sarah said tomorrow she'd tell me how the princess defeats the marshmallow monster." Alexander smoothed her curls gently. "Did she promise to be there tomorrow?" Emma's smile faltered slightly. "Not exactly, but she has to come back, right? She can't leave the story unfinished." Alexander felt a pang of concern. He hadn't thought about what would happen if Sarah didn't return. Emma had connected with the homeless woman in a way she hadn't with anyone since Caroline died. If Sarah disappeared, it might devastate his daughter all over again. "Tell you what, Princess," he said, making a quick decision. "How about we go back to the park tomorrow afternoon, and if Miss Sarah is there, wonderful. If not, maybe we can write our own adventure for the Rabbit Princess." Emma considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, Daddy, but I think she'll be there. She has kind eyes like Mommy did." After Emma fell asleep, Alexander went to his home office and poured himself a scotch. The penthouse was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city below. This silence used to comfort him, but since Caroline's death, it had become oppressive, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. He found himself thinking about Sarah, wondering where she was spending this cold night. The temperature was dropping rapidly and the snow was coming down harder. Was she huddled in some doorway or under a bridge? The thought bothered him more than it should have. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Ramirez, it's Pierce. I need you to do something for me." Miguel Ramirez had been Alexander's head of security for 8 years, and there was little the former FBI agent couldn't find if he put his mind to it. "There's a homeless woman in Central Park. First name Sarah, probably in her early 30s. Articulate, educated, slim build, about 5'6", gray eyes. I need you to find her, tonight." There was a pause on the other end. "Find her and do what exactly, sir?" Alexander hadn't thought that far ahead. What did he want with Sarah? To offer her money? A job? Or was it simply about ensuring she'd be there tomorrow for Emma? Just find her. Make sure she's safe. This weather. He trailed off, looking out at the snow. "Just find her and let me know." "On it, boss," Ramirez replied, professionalism overriding his curiosity. After hanging up, Alexander tried to focus on the Henderson merger documents, but his mind kept wandering back to the park bench and the woman who had shown such kindness to his daughter. There had been something in her eyes, a quiet dignity despite her circumstances, an intelligence that sparked his curiosity. Who was she before she ended up on the streets? What had happened to her? His phone rang at 11:42 p.m. "Ramirez. I found her, Mr. Pierce. She's at the St. Mary's shelter on 52nd. Apparently she's a regular there when the temperature drops below freezing." Alexander felt relief wash over him. "Is she okay?" "Seems to be. I spoke with the shelter coordinator. They know her as Sarah the Storyteller. She reads to the kids there sometimes." Of course she did, Alexander thought. He remembered how naturally the story had flowed from her lips in the park, captivating Emma instantly. "Thanks, Ramirez. Keep this between us." "Always do, sir." Alexander put down his phone and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered city. Somewhere out there, Sarah was safe tonight. The knowledge gave him an odd sense of peace. Morning came with clearing skies and Emma's excited chatter about returning to the park. Alexander had arranged to work from home, a rarity that made his assistant audibly gasp over the phone. "Are you ill, Mr. Pierce?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "No, Charlotte. I'm taking some time with Emma today." After a breakfast that Emma barely touched in her excitement, they bundled up against the cold and headed to Central Park. The fresh snow made everything look clean and new, covering the city's grime with a pristine white blanket. Emma skipped ahead of him, Rosie clutched securely in her arms, her small boots leaving tiny imprints in the snow. "Do you think Miss Sarah will be there already, Daddy?" she asked for the third time. "I don't know, sweetheart. Remember, she might not come today, and that's okay too." But as they approached the bench where they'd met Sarah yesterday, Alexander's heart sank. It was empty, dusted with a layer of untouched snow. Emma's face fell, her lower lip trembling slightly. "She's not here," she whispered, the disappointment in her voice painfully evident. Alexander knelt beside her. "It's still early, Princess. Maybe she'll come later. Let's wait a little while, okay?" They brushed the snow off the bench and sat down. Emma's small shoulders slumped in disappointment. Alexander pulled out his phone to check emails, then thought better of it and tucked it away. Instead, he pointed out the different birds braving the cold and helped Emma make a tiny snowman on the edge of the bench. 30 minutes passed, and Emma grew increasingly despondent. Alexander was about to suggest they leave when a familiar figure appeared on the path, walking slowly toward them. Sarah looked even thinner in the daylight, her coat threadbare but clean. She carried her backpack and had added a knitted scarf around her neck, clearly donated, as it was much newer than the rest of her clothing. "Miss Sarah!" Emma's cry of delight echoed through the park as she jumped up from the bench, startling a nearby pigeon into flight. Sarah's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entirely. "Princess Emma! And you brought Rosie too, I see." As Emma rushed toward her, Alexander was struck again by the natural warmth between them. Emma, who had become so withdrawn since Caroline's death, was beaming up at Sarah as if she'd found a long-lost friend. "We thought you might not come," Alexander said as they approached the bench. Sarah's eyes met his, wary but not unkind. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but I realized I left Princess Rosie facing the marshmallow monster, and that's no way to end a story." "Daddy got us hot chocolate again," Emma said, pointing to the 3 cups Alexander had purchased just in case. "And cinnamon rolls too." Sarah seemed about to refuse, but looking at Emma's hopeful face, she relented. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Pierce." "Alexander, please." He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. He noticed her hands were red from the cold despite the fingerless gloves she wore. As Sarah settled on the bench beside Emma, she picked up the story exactly where she had left off, as if no time had passed. The rabbit princess was facing the dastardly marshmallow monster who had taken over the chocolate river. Emma was immediately enthralled, gasping at the tense moments and giggling at the silly ones. Watching them, Alexander felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate. There was something almost magical about Sarah's storytelling, the way she used different voices for each character, her expressive hands painting pictures in the air, the genuine joy she took in Emma's reactions. When the story reached a natural pausing point, with the rabbit princess planning her strategy to defeat the monster, Sarah turned to Alexander with a curious expression. "You didn't have to wait for me," she said softly, while Emma was distracted making snow angels a few feet away. "I'm sure you have better things to do than sit in the cold." Alexander shook his head. "Nothing better than seeing her happy," he replied, nodding toward Emma. "You have a gift with children." A shadow passed over Sarah's face. "I used to write children's books before." She gestured vaguely at herself, leaving the rest unsaid. "What happened?" Alexander asked, then immediately regretted his directness. "I'm sorry, that was intrusive." Sarah took a sip of her hot chocolate, seeming to consider how much to share. "Life happened, I suppose. My mother got sick, cancer, no insurance. I spent everything I had on her treatment, but she died anyway. Then my job disappeared in a corporate restructuring, and eventually, so did my apartment." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, which made it all the more poignant. Alexander was struck by how quickly fortunes could change, how thin the line was between security and catastrophe for most people. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Sarah shrugged slightly. "Everyone has their struggles. Yours too, I imagine," she said, her eyes drifting to Emma making snow angels. "She's still grieving her mother." Alexander nodded, surprised at Sarah's perception. "My wife died 2 years ago today. Yesterday, actually. Car accident. Emma was in the car but wasn't hurt, physically at least." "That explains the panic attack at school," Sarah said softly. Alexander looked at her sharply. "How did you know about that?" "Emma mentioned it while you were on the phone yesterday. She said her chest got tight and she couldn't breathe because she remembered the day her mommy didn't wake up." Alexander felt a stab of guilt. Emma had never described her attacks to him that way, possibly because he'd never really asked. He'd been so focused on finding solutions, the best doctors, the right medications, that he hadn't simply listened to what his daughter was experiencing. "You're good with her," he said finally. "Better than I've been lately." Sarah's expression softened. "Don't do that. You're her father, and she adores you. Grief is just complicated, especially for little ones." Emma ran back to them, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. "Daddy, Miss Sarah, look! I made snow angels for Mommy to see from heaven." Sarah smiled gently. "They're beautiful, Emma. I bet your mommy loves them." Emma climbed back onto the bench between them, snuggling close to Sarah with the easy trust of childhood. "Can you come back tomorrow too? For more story?" Alexander saw Sarah hesitate, torn between the obvious affection she felt for Emma and the awkwardness of the situation. Before she could answer, he spoke up. "Actually, Emma and I were wondering if you might join us for dinner tonight. At our home," he added, when Sarah looked confused. "As a thank you for being so kind to Emma, and to Rosie," he added with a small smile. Emma gasped with delight. "Yes, please come, Miss Sarah. I can show you my room and all my books and—" "I don't think that would be appropriate," Sarah interrupted gently. "But thank you for the invitation." "Why not?" Emma asked, her face falling. Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Well, because your father and I hardly know each other, and I insist," Alexander said firmly. "Just dinner. My housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, will be there too, so it's all very proper," he added with a slight smile. "Please, it would mean a lot to Emma. And to me," he added, surprising himself with his sincerity. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Whatever she saw in his expression must have reassured her because she finally nodded. "All right, just dinner. Thank you." "Yay!" Emma squealed, throwing her arms around Sarah's neck. "This is going to be the best night ever." As they made arrangements for the evening, Alexander wondered what had possessed him to invite a homeless woman to his penthouse. Part of it was gratitude, certainly, and a desire to see Emma's happiness continue. But there was something more, a curiosity about Sarah, a pull toward her quiet strength and dignity that he couldn't quite explain. Whatever it was, he had the strange feeling that his impulsive invitation was about to change all their lives in ways none of them could predict. Sarah stood on the sidewalk outside Alexander's building, clutching her backpack and fighting the urge to flee. The towering glass structure seemed to touch the clouds, its polished exterior reflecting the setting sun in shades of gold and amber. This was madness. What was she doing here? After they'd parted ways in the park, she'd gone back to the shelter to wash up as best she could. The coordinator had given her a clean sweater from the donations box, dark green and only slightly worn at the elbows. She'd even managed to wash her hair in the communal bathroom, though without a hairdryer, it hung in damp waves around her face. But no amount of scrubbing could hide the fact that she didn't belong here, among the elegant doormen and residents in designer clothes who eyed her suspiciously as they passed. Just as she was about to turn and walk away, the doorman approached her. "Miss Walker?" he asked, surprisingly respectful. "Mr. Pierce is expecting you." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because the man gave her a small, kind smile. "The service entrance is around the back if you'd prefer—" "No, Harold, that won't be necessary," came Alexander's voice as he emerged from the building. "Ms. Walker is our guest." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for his timing and understanding. He had changed from the business suit he'd worn earlier into dark jeans and a casual sweater that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. Even dressed down, he exuded wealth and power, yet there was a gentleness in his expression as he looked at her. "I was afraid you might change your mind," he said, gesturing for her to enter. "I almost did," she admitted, following him into a lobby that gleamed with marble and glass. "I'm glad you didn't. Emma's been talking about nothing else all afternoon." The elevator was private, requiring a keycard to access the penthouse level. As they ascended, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. This was just dinner, she reminded herself. She wasn't committing to anything. She was doing this for Emma, the little girl who needed someone to finish her story. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Sarah couldn't suppress a small gasp. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled. The space was immense and elegantly designed with modern furnishings that somehow managed to look both expensive and comfortable. "Miss Sarah!" Emma's excited voice preceded her as she came running from a hallway, Rosie clutched in one arm. She wore a pretty blue dress that matched her eyes, her golden curls neatly brushed. "You came!" Sarah knelt down, opening her arms as Emma barreled into them for a hug. "Of course I came, Princess Emma. I promised, didn't I? Come see my room. I have all my books ready to show you and—" "Emma," Alexander interrupted gently. "Let's give Miss Sarah a moment to settle in. Maybe she'd like to freshen up before dinner?" Sarah stood, suddenly self-conscious of her damp hair and worn clothes. "That would be nice, thank you." A woman appeared from what Sarah assumed was the kitchen, tall, thin, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her expression was one of cautious assessment as she eyed Sarah. "Mrs. Finch, this is Sarah Walker," Alexander introduced them. "Sarah, this is Mrs. Finch, our housekeeper." "Pleased to meet you," Sarah said, extending her hand. Mrs. Finch took it after a slight hesitation. "Likewise, Ms. Walker. I'll show you to the guest bathroom." As she followed Mrs. Finch down a hallway, Sarah was acutely aware of her worn backpack and shabby appearance in contrast to the pristine surroundings. The bathroom was larger than her old apartment's entire kitchen, with marble countertops and plush towels that looked too perfect to use. "Take your time, dear," Mrs. Finch said, her tone softening slightly. "Dinner won't be ready for another 20 minutes. Left alone, Sarah set her backpack down carefully on the floor, afraid to put it on any of the immaculate surfaces. She looked at herself in the mirror and winced. Despite her best efforts at the shelter, she looked exactly like what she was, a homeless woman playing dress-up in a world where she didn't belong. She washed her hands with the fragrant soap, splashed water on her face, and tried to smooth her unruly hair. There wasn't much else she could do. With a deep breath, she picked up her backpack and rejoined the others. Emma had been waiting impatiently and immediately took Sarah's hand. "Now can I show you my room, please, Daddy?" Alexander, who had been preparing drinks at a sleek bar in the corner, nodded with a smile. "Go ahead. I'll call you when dinner's ready." Emma's room was a little girl's paradise, a canopy bed with sheer curtains, shelves filled with toys and books, and a window seat overlooking the park where they'd met. But what caught Sarah's attention were the photographs on the nightstand. A beautiful blonde woman with Emma's eyes smiled from several frames. Caroline, Sarah presumed. In one photo, the woman held a newborn Emma, her face radiant with joy. "That's my mommy," Emma said, following Sarah's gaze. "She's in heaven now." "She was beautiful," Sarah said softly. "You look just like her." Emma nodded solemnly. "That's what Daddy says too. Sometimes it makes him sad to look at me." Sarah's heart ached at the simple, devastating insight. "Oh, Emma, I'm sure that's not true. Your daddy loves you very much." "I know." Emma picked up Rosie from her bed. "But he forgets to play sometimes. He works a lot. Mommy never forgot to play." Before Sarah could respond to this, Emma was pulling books from her shelves, eager to show Sarah her favorites. They spent the next 15 minutes with Emma reading aloud from a book about a magical pony, her small finger tracing under each word as she sounded them out. "You're a wonderful reader," Sarah praised, genuinely impressed with the child's ability. "Mommy taught me," Emma said proudly. "She said books are magic that anyone can make." Sarah smiled, remembering her own mother saying something similar. "Your mommy was very wise." "Dinner's ready, ladies," Alexander called from the doorway, watching them with an expression Sarah couldn't quite decipher. The dining room continued the theme of understated luxury, with a table that could easily seat 12 but had been intimately set for 3 at one end. Mrs. Finch served a delicious meal of roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, and what might have been the best mashed potatoes Sarah had ever tasted. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain decorum, but it had been so long since she'd had a proper home-cooked meal that it was difficult. "This is wonderful," she said, after swallowing a bite of chicken. "Thank you for having me." "Thank you for coming," Alexander replied, refilling her water glass. "Emma was right about you, you know." "Oh? What did she say?" "That you tell the best stories she's ever heard. High praise from a child raised on professional audiobooks and Broadway shows." Sarah felt herself blush. "It's just something I've always loved doing." "Daddy," Emma interjected, "Miss Sarah used to write books. For kids like me." Alexander looked at her with increased interest. "Is that true?" Sarah nodded, suddenly uncomfortable under his gaze. "I was an editor, actually, at Callaway Publishing, but I was working on my own children's book series before everything happened." "What were your books about?" he asked. "They were about a little rabbit princess," Emma answered for her. "Just like in her stories." "You actually wrote down the stories you've been telling, Emma?" Sarah nodded. "I had completed 3 manuscripts. The first one was in the final editing stages when I lost my job." "Do you still have them?" Sarah's expression clouded. "No. When I lost my apartment, I could only take what I could carry. Most of my things ended up in storage, but I couldn't keep up with the payments. Everything was auctioned off months ago." Alexander frowned. "That's a terrible shame." "It is what it is," Sarah replied, the familiar mantra helping her maintain composure. "I still have the stories in my head. That's something, at least." "Miss Sarah, can you tell me more of the rabbit princess story after dinner?" Emma asked, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult conversation. "Please?" "If your father doesn't mind," Sarah replied. "I'd like to hear it too," Alexander said. "I missed most of it yesterday being on the phone." There was a touch of self-recrimination in his voice that made Sarah look at him more closely. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Emma snuggled between Sarah and Alexander on a plush sofa. Sarah picked up the story where she'd left off in the park, with the rabbit princess devising a plan to defeat the marshmallow monster. As she spoke, crafting the narrative with the care and precision that had once been her profession, she was aware of Alexander watching her, his attention more focused than it had been at the park. He seemed to be analyzing her, his eyes thoughtful as she described the rabbit princess's clever strategy to melt the marshmallow monster with kindness instead of fighting. And so the marshmallow monster, who had never been shown kindness before, began to soften, not just his sticky exterior, but his heart as well, Sarah narrated, making melting gestures with her hands that made Emma giggle. Soon he wasn't a monster at all, but a friend who helped guard the chocolate river and make sure everyone could enjoy it fairly. "That's not how most stories end," Alexander commented when she finished. "Usually the monster gets defeated or destroyed." "I prefer stories where understanding wins over force," Sarah replied. "The best victories are the ones where nobody has to lose." He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. A refreshing perspective. Emma had grown sleepy during the story, her head nodding against Sarah's arm. Alexander checked his watch. "It's past your bedtime, princess. Say goodnight to Miss Sarah." "But I don't want her to go," Emma protested weakly even as she yawned. "Can't she stay?" The question hung in the air, innocent but loaded. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm. "Miss Sarah has to get back to her home," Alexander said carefully. "But perhaps she can visit again soon?" He looked at Sarah questioningly. She knew she should refuse, should end this strange interlude before it became complicated. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, she found she couldn't. "I'd like that," she said softly. Alexander carried a half-asleep Emma to bed while Sarah waited awkwardly in the living room, examining the photographs displayed on shelves and tables. Most featured Emma at various ages, often with Caroline. There were few of Alexander. He seemed more comfortable behind the camera than in front of it. "She went out like a light," Alexander said, returning to the living room. "Would you like some tea? Or something stronger?" "Tea would be nice, thank you." As he prepared it in the kitchen, Sarah found herself drawn to a large photograph on the mantel. It showed Alexander, Caroline, and a newborn Emma in the hospital, all three bathed in golden light. The love between the parents was palpable, even in a still image. "That was the happiest day of my life," Alexander said, returning with 2 steaming mugs. Though Caroline might argue it was actually our wedding day. His voice held a wistful tone. "You must miss her terribly," Sarah said, accepting the tea. Alexander nodded, his gaze still on the photograph. "Every day. But it's harder on Emma. She remembers enough to know what she's lost, but she's too young to fully process it." He turned to Sarah. "Until yesterday, I haven't seen her that animated in months. You have a gift. Children respond to stories. It gives them a safe way to explore difficult feelings." Sarah took a sip of her tea. "Emma is a special little girl. You've done well with her." "Have I?" he asked, and there was genuine doubt in his voice. "Most days I feel like I'm failing her completely." Sarah considered him thoughtfully. "You're trying. That counts for a lot." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, sipping their tea before Sarah reluctantly set down her mug. "I should go. The shelter has a curfew." Alexander frowned. "You're going back to the shelter?" "Where else would I go?" she asked, a touch defensively. "I just meant—" He shook his head. "Let me call my driver to take you." "That's not necessary. The subway is fine." "Please, I insist. It's late and it's cold." Sarah wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but practicality won out. "Thank you." As they waited for the elevator, Alexander seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, I have a proposition for you." She tensed immediately, her defenses rising. "I'm not interested in—" No, he interrupted quickly, looking embarrassed. "Nothing like that. It's about Emma. She clearly adores you, and you have a way with her that I've never seen before. I was wondering if you might consider coming back. Regularly, I mean, as her nanny." Sarah stared at him, stunned. "Her nanny? But I'm educated, good with children, and in need of a job," he finished for her. "I need someone Emma connects with, and you need stability. It seems like a solution that could benefit us both." The elevator arrived with a soft ping, but Sarah made no move to enter it. "You don't know anything about me," she said slowly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're kind. I know you're talented. And I know my daughter lights up around you in a way she hasn't since her mother died. The rest we can figure out." Sarah felt overwhelmed. It was too much, too fast. "I need to think about it." Alexander nodded, not pushing. "Of course. The offer stands whenever you're ready." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "My personal number is on the back. Call any time." Sarah took the card, tucking it carefully into her backpack. As the elevator doors closed between them, she caught one last glimpse of Alexander's face, hopeful, determined, and something else she couldn't quite name. In the back of the luxurious town car, Sarah leaned her head against the cool window, watching the city lights blur past. Her life had been a series of losses and disappointments for so long that the sudden prospect of change left her dizzy. Part of her wanted to accept Alexander's offer immediately, to sleep in a real bed, to eat regular meals, to be around Emma's bright spirit. But another part, the part that had learned to protect herself after so many hardships, whispered caution. Alexander Pierce lived in a different world, a world of penthouse apartments and private drivers, of wealth and privilege she could scarcely imagine. What place could she possibly have there except as an employee, a charity case he'd picked up in the park? And yet, There had been moments tonight when none of that seemed to matter, moments when they were just two people sharing tea and memories, connected by their care for a little girl who needed them both. As the car pulled up to the shelter, Sarah thanked the driver and stepped out into the cold night, Alexander's card burning a hole in her pocket like a coal that could either warm her or burn her. She wasn't sure which. He offered you a job? As his daughter's nanny? Martha, the shelter coordinator, stared at Sarah with wide eyes. They sat in the small office at St. Mary's, steam rising from chipped mugs of instant coffee. Sarah, that's incredible. 3 days had passed since the dinner at Alexander's penthouse. 3 days of Sarah turning his proposition over in her mind, examining it from every angle, searching for the catch. I don't know, Martha. It seems too good to be true. And you know what they say about things that seem too good to be true. Martha, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been running the shelter for over 2 decades, gave her a shrewd look. Is he expecting extras with the job? No, Sarah said immediately, remembering Alexander's embarrassment when she'd initially misunderstood his offer. It's not like that. He seems genuinely concerned about his daughter. The little girl lost her mother 2 years ago and has been struggling. We connected somehow. Then what's holding you back? A steady job, a roof over your head that isn't this place. Sounds like exactly what you've been praying for. Sarah sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. I'd be entering a world I don't belong in, Martha. Living in a penthouse, surrounded by wealth and privilege. It's not my world. And this is? Martha gestured around the cramped office with its peeling paint and mismatched furniture. Sarah, I've known you for 8 months now. You're smart, educated, kind. You don't belong here any more than I do. We're just making the best of bad circumstances. But what if I fail? What if I can't help his daughter? What if I'm just setting myself up for another disappointment? Martha reached across the desk and patted Sarah's hand. That's fear talking, honey, and I understand it. Life's beaten you down pretty hard, but sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Sarah pulled Alexander's business card from her pocket, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Pierce Enterprises. The weight of the card, the quality of the paper, everything about it screamed success and stability, 2 things that had been absent from her life for too long. What if he changes his mind? She whispered, voicing her deepest fear. What if I start to depend on this, start to care about Emma, and then he decides I'm not what they need after all? That's the risk with any job, any relationship, Martha said gently. But staying here, staying stuck, that's a certainty, not a risk. You know where that leads. Sarah did know. She'd seen too many people at the shelter gradually lose hope, their time on the streets stretching from months to years until homelessness became not a temporary condition, but an identity. She didn't want that for herself. I've held your spot in the writing workshop for months, Martha continued. You've got talent, Sarah, real talent, but you need stability to create. Maybe this job is the foundation you need to rebuild your life, to start writing again. Sarah looked out the small window at the gray December sky. Snow was beginning to fall again, thick flakes swirling in the wind. Another cold night was coming. The shelter would be packed, the air thick with desperation and unwashed bodies. Okay, she said finally. I'll call him. Martha's smile was warm with approval. Use my office. I'll give you some privacy. When Martha left, Sarah stared at the phone on the desk, gathering her courage. Finally, she dialed the number on the back of the card. Alexander answered on the second ring. Pierce speaking. It's Sarah, Sarah Walker. Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. Sarah. The warmth in his tone was unexpected. I'm glad you called. About your offer. She paused, still uncertain. I'd like to accept, if it's still available. It is. She could hear the smile in his voice. When can you start? Whenever you need me to. Today? He asked, surprising her. Emma's been asking about you non-stop. She's worried you might not come back. Sarah thought about her few possessions, already packed in her backpack. There was nothing keeping her at the shelter except fear. "Today works," she said, feeling a curious mixture of terror and hope. "Excellent. I'll send a car for you at 4. Is that enough time?" "More than enough." She had nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. "Sarah?" His voice softened. "Thank you. This means a lot to Emma. And to me." After hanging up, Sarah sat motionless, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her fortunes. Just 5 days ago, she'd been huddled on a park bench wondering where her next meal would come from. Now she was about to move into a penthouse as nanny to a billionaire's daughter. Life could change so quickly, for better or worse. She knew that better than most. Martha returned, her expression questioning. "I start today," Sarah said, still dazed. "He's sending a car at 4. Martha beamed. "I knew you'd make the right choice. Now let's see what we can find you in the donations to spruce up your wardrobe a bit." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Martha helped Sarah select a few decent outfits from the shelter's donations, and even convinced a volunteer who was a hairdresser to trim Sarah's unruly locks. By the time the sleek black car pulled up outside the shelter, Sarah looked more put together than she had in months, though still far from the polished appearance expected in Alexander Pierce's world. "Remember," Martha said, hugging her goodbye, "you deserve this chance. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." Sarah hugged her back fiercely. "Thank you for everything." "Just don't forget about us little people when you're living the high life," Martha teased, "and I expect to see that children's book published someday." The car ride to Alexander's building was surreal. Sarah watched the city transform as they moved from her impoverished neighborhood to the glittering avenues of the ultra-wealthy. She felt like an imposter, a changeling about to be discovered and cast out. The doorman, Harold, she remembered, greeted her with a respectful nod, as if she were already part of the household. The elevator whisked her upward, her stomach dropping not just from the rapid ascent, but from the enormity of what she was doing. This time, it was Emma who met her as the elevator doors opened, launching herself at Sarah with a squeal of delight. "Miss Sarah! Daddy said you're going to stay with us and tell me stories every day." Sarah hugged the little girl, her doubts momentarily forgotten in the warmth of that welcome. "That's right, Princess Emma. If that's okay with you?" "It's the best thing ever," Emma declared, taking Sarah's hand and pulling her into the penthouse. "I already showed Mrs. Finch which room should be yours. It's right next to mine so you can tell me stories before bed." Alexander appeared from his home office, his expression relieved. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," Sarah replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Emma, why don't you let Mrs. Finch help you with your homework while I show Miss Sarah around and discuss the details of her position?" Emma pouted briefly but complied, skipping off toward the kitchen where Mrs. Finch was apparently preparing dinner. Alexander led Sarah through the penthouse, showing her the layout, his office, the living areas, Emma's room, and finally, the guest suite that would be hers. The room was larger than any bedroom she'd ever had, with its own bathroom and a sitting area near windows that offered a breathtaking view of the park. "I hope this will be comfortable," Alexander said, watching her face as she took it all in. "If you need anything changed or added, just let Mrs. Finch know." "It's perfect," Sarah managed, overwhelmed by the luxury. A king-sized bed with what looked like the softest sheets imaginable, plush carpet underfoot, a desk by the window where she could write. It was more than she'd dared to hope for. "Let's discuss the specifics," Alexander said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the armchairs while he took the other. "The position comes with room and board, obviously. The salary is $75,000 annually, with health insurance and 4 weeks of paid vacation. Does that sound fair?" Sarah nearly choked. The salary was more than she'd made as an editor, and with no rent or food costs, it was an astronomical sum to someone who'd been counting pennies for months. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "I believe in paying people what they're worth," he replied. "Your primary responsibility will be Emma, getting her ready for school, helping with homework, bedtime routines. She has school from 8:30 to 3 on weekdays, which gives you time to yourself during those hours. Weekends are flexible. I often have work commitments, but when I'm free, I want to spend that time with Emma." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "What about Mrs. Finch? What's her role?" "Mrs. Finch handles the household, cooking, cleaning, errands. She's been with us since before Emma was born, and she's invaluable, but she's not warm. Emma needs warmth right now." "And what about you?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I mean, what are your expectations regarding interactions between us?" Alexander's expression softened with understanding. "I expect professionalism and honesty. I don't expect subservience or anything inappropriate. We're two adults working together to help a little girl who's been through a lot. That's all." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. "I can do that." "Good." He smiled, and Sarah was struck again by how it transformed his serious face. "Now, about your background. I assume you don't have recent references?" Sarah tensed. Here it was, the moment where reality intruded, where her months of homelessness became a black mark against her. "No," she admitted. "My former employer downsized and my direct supervisor left the company. I can give you names, but—" "It's fine," Alexander interrupted. "I've done some background checking already. Your reputation at Callaway Publishing was excellent. Several of your former colleagues spoke highly of your work ethic and creativity." Sarah stared at him. "You checked up on me?" "Of course I did. I'm entrusting you with my daughter." His tone was matter-of-fact, not apologetic. "I know about your mother's illness, the medical bills, the loss of your apartment. I know you've never had any trouble with the law. I know you volunteered reading to children at the public library every Saturday for 3 years." "You've been thorough," Sarah said, unsure whether to be impressed or offended. "I'm thorough about everything that matters," he replied. "And Emma matters more than anything." There was something in the intensity of his gaze that made Sarah look away first. "I understand, and I promise I'll do my best for her. That's all I ask." He stood. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner's at 7. After that, I thought you might help Emma with her bedtime routine, get a feel for it. I usually read to her, but she's already informed me that she wants your stories from now on." Left alone in her new room, Sarah set her backpack on the bed and took a deep breath. The space was so quiet, so private after months in the shelter. She ran her fingers over the plush comforter, the polished wood of the desk, the soft carpet, touching these luxuries as if to convince herself they were real. In the bathroom, she found new toiletries arranged neatly on the counter, high-end brands she'd never been able to afford even before homelessness. She turned on the shower, adjusting it to the perfect temperature, and stepped under the spray with a sigh of pure pleasure. Hot water, abundant and uninterrupted, was a luxury she'd almost forgotten. Afterward, wrapped in the softest towel she'd ever felt, Sarah unpacked her meager belongings, a few pieces of clothing, a battered copy of Jane Eyre that had been her mother's, a notebook filled with story ideas, and a small wooden box containing her few remaining pieces of jewelry. Everything she owned in the world barely filled one drawer of the massive dresser. A knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, hastily closing the drawer. Mrs. Finch entered, her arms full of neatly folded clothing. "Mr. Pierce thought you might need these until you can shop for yourself," she said, placing the items on the bed. "They belong to Mrs. Pierce. You seem about her size." Sarah stared at the clothes. Designer jeans, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, all with tags still attached. "I couldn't possibly—" "They've never been worn," Mrs. Finch interrupted. "Mrs. Pierce bought them the week before the accident. Mr. Pierce couldn't bear to get rid of them, but he thought she would want them to be used." The gesture was both thoughtful and heartbreaking. Sarah touched a soft gray sweater, imagining the woman who had chosen it. "Thank you. Please tell Mr. Pierce I'm very grateful." Mrs. Finch nodded, her usually stern face softening slightly. "Dinner in 30 minutes. Emma is quite excited to have you here." She hesitated at the door. "Miss Walker?" "Yes?" "Emma needs someone like you, someone with heart. This house has been too full of sadness for too long." Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Finch was gone, leaving her to contemplate the unexpected alliance and the weight of expectation her presence had created. For dinner, Sarah chose the gray sweater and a pair of jeans from Caroline's clothes. They fit well enough, though Sarah's frame, thinned by months of insufficient food, was more angular than the previous owners had likely been. Still, she felt more presentable than she had in a long time as she made her way to the dining room. Emma's delight at seeing her was unrestrained. "You look so pretty, Miss Sarah. Doesn't she look pretty, Daddy?" Alexander, who had been checking something on his phone, looked up. For a moment his expression was unreadable as he took in the sight of Sarah in his late wife's clothes. Then he smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Very nice," he said simply. "I'm glad they fit." Dinner was less formal than it had been during Sarah's previous visit, with Emma chattering excitedly about school, her friends, and all the stories she wanted Sarah to tell her. Sarah felt Alexander watching her throughout the meal, his gaze thoughtful, assessing. Later, after helping Emma with her bath and telling her the next installment of the Rabbit Princess story, Sarah found herself alone with Alexander in the living room again. "She fell asleep halfway through the story," Sarah said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "I think the excitement wore her out." "She hasn't been this happy in a long time," Alexander observed, sitting across from her. "Whatever doubts I had about this arrangement are gone. You're good for her." "It's only been a few hours," Sarah cautioned. "The novelty might wear off." "Perhaps, but I don't think so." He studied her over his wine glass. "Tell me about your book, the one you were working on before." "Before my life fell apart?" Sarah supplied with a wry smile. "It was a series about a rabbit princess who learns important life lessons through adventures in a magical kingdom. Pretty standard children's fare, but with a focus on emotional intelligence and problem-solving rather than typical princess tropes. Like melting the marshmallow monster with kindness instead of fighting it," Alexander recalled. Sarah nodded, pleased that he remembered. "Exactly. Each book was going to focus on a different emotion or challenge. Fear, anger, loneliness, cooperation. Do you think you could recreate them? The manuscripts, I mean." Sarah considered this. "Maybe. The stories are still in my head, but the exact wording, the flow, it took months to get those right." "But you could try?" "I could," she agreed, curious about his interest. "Why?" Alexander set down his wine glass. "I have a friend who owns a small publishing house. If you could get at least one manuscript ready, I'd be happy to introduce you." Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want you to feel obligated." "It's not obligation," he interrupted. "It's good business. From what you've shown with Emma, you have genuine talent. Talent deserves an audience." Sarah didn't know how to respond. After months of doors closing in her face, of opportunities evaporating, here was Alexander Pierce offering to open a door she'd thought permanently shut. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll start working on it." "Good." He stood, checking his watch. "I have some work to finish. Make yourself at home, Sarah, because that's what this is now, your home." As he left, Sarah remained on the sofa, sipping her wine slowly, letting his words sink in. Home. Such a simple word, but one that had become almost foreign to her. She walked to the window, gazing out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there were the streets she'd walked in despair, the shelter where she'd huddled for warmth, the park bench where a chance encounter had changed everything. Now she stood 54 floors above it all, in a world of luxury and privilege she'd never imagined entering, a world where a little girl needed her stories and her heart, a world where perhaps she could rebuild her own story, word by precious word. Home. She let herself believe it, just a little. For tonight at least, she was home. By the end of January, Sarah had settled into a rhythm in the Pierce household. Each morning, she helped Emma prepare for school, brushing her hair, making sure she had everything in her backpack, and walking her to the private academy 6 blocks away. While Emma was at school, Sarah worked on recreating her manuscripts, the words flowing more easily now that she had stability and purpose again. In the afternoons, she and Emma would spend time together, doing homework, baking cookies with Mrs. Finch, who had warmed considerably toward Sarah, or venturing out to museums and parks when the weather permitted. Evenings were for dinner with Alexander when he wasn't working late, followed by bath time and stories for Emma. The Rabbit Princess stories had evolved, with Emma offering suggestions that Sarah often incorporated. The little girl was flourishing, her nightmares less frequent, her smile more readily given. Sarah kept a journal documenting Emma's progress, noting improvements in everything from her appetite to her willingness to talk about her mother. Alexander had noticed the changes too. Her teacher says she's participating more in class, he told Sarah one evening as they shared a cup of tea after Emma had gone to bed. She even volunteered to read aloud yesterday. That hasn't happened since Caroline died. Sarah smiled, warmed by his words. She's resilient. She just needed consistency and someone to listen. Someone who isn't always checking emails during story time, Alexander added ruefully. I've been guilty of that too often. You're doing your best, Sarah said gently. Being a single parent and running a company isn't easy. Their evening conversations had become a regular part of the routine, a quiet moment of connection before Sarah retired to her room to work on her manuscript and Alexander returned to his endless stream of business documents. Sometimes they discussed Emma, sometimes books or current events, occasionally sharing bits of their past, though Alexander remained reticent about certain topics, particularly his relationship with Caroline. Sarah found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she cared to admit. Alexander Pierce was a complex man, driven and occasionally stern in his business dealings, but capable of surprising tenderness with Emma. He was undeniably attractive too, though Sarah firmly pushed away such thoughts whenever they arose. Her position was too precarious, the power dynamic too uneven for her to indulge in anything beyond professional friendliness. Tonight, Alexander seemed distracted, his gaze repeatedly drifting to the window where snow was falling heavily. "Is everything all right?" Sarah asked, setting down her teacup. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of stress. "The Henderson merger is falling apart again. I need to fly to Chicago tomorrow to salvage it." "For how long?" 3 days, maybe 4. He looked troubled. "I hate leaving Emma, especially with her birthday coming up on Saturday." Sarah calculated quickly. Today was Tuesday. "If you leave tomorrow and it's just 3 days, you'll be back in time." "That's the hope. But these negotiations are unpredictable." He met her eyes. "Will you be okay with her? Mrs. Finch will be here, of course, but Emma might be upset about my absence." "We'll be fine," Sarah assured him. "I'll keep her busy, and we can FaceTime you every night." Alexander nodded gratefully. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Sarah." The simple sincerity in his voice made her heart skip a beat, which she firmly ignored. "That's what I'm here for." The next morning, Emma took the news of her father's trip with surprising equanimity. "Will you still help me with my birthday party?" she asked Sarah over breakfast. "Daddy said I could invite friends from school this year." "Of course I will," Sarah promised. "We'll make it the best birthday ever." After seeing Alexander off in the town car, Sarah and Emma walked to school together, making plans for the party along the way. Emma wanted a Rabbit Princess theme naturally, with decorations and activities based on Sarah's stories. "And can you make a special story just for the party?" Emma asked, her blue eyes bright with excitement. "Where the rabbit princess has a birthday." "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah agreed. "We can even act it out with your friends." Emma skipped ahead, clearly delighted, and Sarah marveled at the change in her. The withdrawn, anxious child she'd met in the park 2 months ago was blossoming into a confident, happy little girl. There was still sadness sometimes, still moments when Emma would grow quiet and clutch Rosie to her chest, but they were becoming less frequent. That evening, after reading to Emma and tucking her in, Sarah settled at her desk to work on her manuscript. She had nearly completed the first book in the series, thanks to the quiet hours while Emma was at school and the inspiration of telling the stories anew each day. Alexander had kept his promise, connecting her with his friend at the publishing house who had expressed interest in seeing the finished product. Just as she was hitting her stride, a small voice called from the doorway of her room. "Miss Sarah?" Emma stood there in her pajamas, Rosie clutched in one arm, tears streaming down her face. "Emma! What's wrong, sweetheart?" Sarah hurried to kneel in front of her. "I had the bad dream again," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. "The one where Mommy doesn't wake up and then Daddy goes away too and never comes back." Sarah pulled her into a gentle hug. "Oh, Emma, your daddy will be back soon, I promise." "But what if his plane crashes like in my dream? What if he goes to heaven with Mommy and leaves me all alone?" Sarah led Emma to the bed, sitting beside her and stroking her hair. "Your daddy is on a very safe plane and he'll call us tomorrow morning. He would never leave you alone, Emma." "But Mommy didn't want to leave me alone either," Emma said with the devastating logic of a child. "Sometimes people don't get to choose." Sarah felt her heart breaking for this little girl who had learned life's cruelest lesson far too young. "That's true," she acknowledged. "Sometimes sad things happen that we can't control, but we can't let fear of what might happen stop us from being happy now." Emma looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. "Were you afraid when you didn't have a home?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Emma knew a simplified version of her story, that Sarah had lost her job and her apartment before meeting them in the park, but they'd never discussed the emotional reality of that time. "Yes," Sarah admitted, "I was very afraid, but even then I found things to be grateful for. Kind people at the shelter, books from the library, beautiful days in the park where I could tell stories to myself." "And then you met us," Emma said. Sarah smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "And then I met you, which was the most wonderful thing that could have happened." Emma leaned against her, her small body still trembling slightly. "Can I stay with you tonight? Just until I'm not scared anymore?" "Of course you can." Sarah tucked Emma into her bed, then lay beside her, telling a soft, soothing story about the rabbit princess finding her way home through a dark forest by following the stars. Before long, Emma's breathing deepened into sleep, her hand still clutching Sarah's. Looking down at the sleeping child, Sarah felt a wave of protectiveness so fierce it almost frightened her. When had this little girl become so important to her? When had this job become so much more than just a job? Carefully, so as not to wake Emma, Sarah reached for her phone on the nightstand and texted Alexander, "Emma had a nightmare about your plane crashing. She's okay now, sleeping in my room. Might help if you call first thing tomorrow." His response came within seconds. "Thanks for letting me know. We'll call at 7:30 your time. Is she very upset?" "She's all right now, just worried. She misses you." There was a longer pause before his next message appeared. "I miss her too. And you. Thank you for being there for her, Sarah." Sarah stared at those words. "And you," feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the expensive down comforter. She shouldn't read anything into it, she knew. It was just a polite acknowledgement, nothing more. So why did it make her heart race like a schoolgirl's? She set her phone aside without responding and gently stroked Emma's hair, listening to her peaceful breathing. Whatever complicated feelings might be developing between her and Alexander, Emma's well-being had to remain their priority. The little girl had already lost one important woman in her life. Sarah was determined that their relationship would remain constant and secure, regardless of what else might happen. Still, as she drifted off to sleep beside Emma, she couldn't help but wonder what Alexander was doing at that moment. If he was looking out at the same stars she could see through her window. If he was thinking of them as she was thinking of him. The next morning brought a flurry of activity, getting Emma ready for school while fielding excited questions about her birthday party, which was now just 3 days away. Alexander called exactly at 7:30 as promised, his face on the video call tired but smiling as Emma excitedly told him about her nightmare and how Miss Sarah had made it better. "I'm very glad Miss Sarah was there," he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's over Emma's head with a warmth that made her look away first. "I'll be home as soon as I can, Princess. Promise." "In time for my party?" Emma pressed. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." After dropping Emma at school, Sarah returned to the penthouse to find Mrs. Finch in a state of mild distress. "The bakery just called," the housekeeper explained. "There's been a mix-up with Emma's birthday cake order. They can't do the rabbit design she wanted." "That's disappointing," Sarah said. "Can they do something else?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "They're fully booked. It's one of the most exclusive bakeries in the city. People order months in advance. We're lucky Mr. Pierce has connections, or we wouldn't have gotten any slot at all." Sarah thought for a moment. "What if we make the cake ourselves? I used to bake with my mother all the time. I bet Emma would love to help." Mrs. Finch looked doubtful. "Mr. Pierce always orders from Madeline's. It's tradition." "Sometimes new traditions can be just as special," Sarah suggested gently. "And it would give Emma something positive to focus on while her dad is away." After some persuasion, Mrs. Finch agreed, and they spent the afternoon gathering ingredients and equipment for what would be an ambitious rabbit-shaped cake. When Emma returned from school, she was thrilled with the change of plans. "We get to make it ourselves? Really?" Her eyes widened with excitement. "Can we make it purple? The rabbit princess is purple in my head." "We can make it any color you want," Sarah promised. "It's your birthday." The next 2 days passed in a blur of party preparations. Alexander called each evening, his negotiations apparently progressing well, though slowly. By Friday afternoon, the penthouse had been transformed with decorations in shades of purple and silver, Emma's chosen colors for her rabbit princess party. The cake, after several attempts, had turned out remarkably well. A purple rabbit with silver crown and details, surrounded by fondant carrots and flowers. Mrs. Finch, initially skeptical, had become an enthusiastic participant in the project, her hidden talent for detailed icing work producing delicate whiskers and expressive eyes for the rabbit. "It's the most beautiful cake ever," Emma declared, bouncing with excitement. "Wait until Daddy sees it." "He'll be very impressed," Sarah agreed, though privately she was beginning to worry. Alexander hadn't called yet today, and the last update had been that negotiations were at a critical stage. If the talks ran long, he might not make it back in time for tomorrow's party. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang with Alexander's ringtone. She stepped into the kitchen to take the call. "How are the birthday preparations going?" he asked, his voice tight with what sounded like strain. "Everything's ready," Sarah replied. "Emma's very excited. We've made an amazing cake and—" "Sarah," he interrupted gently, "I've hit a snag. Henderson's team is being difficult, and we need at least one more day of negotiations." Sarah's heart sank. "So you won't be back for the party?" "I'm trying to rearrange things, catch a red-eye tonight, but it's not looking good." The frustration in his voice was palpable. "How do I tell her? She'll be devastated." Sarah thought quickly. "Don't tell her yet. Let me try something first. I'll call you back in an hour." After hanging up, Sarah paced the kitchen, weighing options. Emma's disappointment would be profound if Alexander missed her birthday, potentially triggering another regression in her emotional progress. There had to be a solution. An idea began to form. Risky, perhaps even presumptuous, but potentially worth it. She called Alexander back. "What if I bring Emma to you?" she suggested without preamble. "We could take the evening flight to Chicago, spend the night, and have a small celebration in your hotel tomorrow morning before flying back for the actual party in the afternoon." There was silence on the other end. "You'd do that?" Alexander finally asked. "Of course. Emma's happiness is what matters, and this way she gets extra adventure for her birthday." "Sarah Walker," he said, his voice warm with something that made her pulse quicken. "You continue to amaze me. Let me make the arrangements." 3 hours later, Sarah and an ecstatic Emma were boarding a private jet to Chicago, the little girl beside herself with excitement at the surprise adventure. Mrs. Finch had stayed behind to oversee final party preparations, promising to have everything ready for their return the next day. "This is the best birthday surprise ever," Emma exclaimed as the plane took off, her earlier fears of flying completely forgotten in her excitement. "We're going to see Daddy, and then have my party, and everything is perfect." Looking at Emma's joyful face, Sarah couldn't help but agree. In just 2 months, her life had transformed from one of desperate survival to one filled with purpose and joy. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight she was flying through the stars with a little girl who had captured her heart, heading toward a man who was beginning to occupy more of her thoughts than she cared to admit. For someone who had lost everything, Sarah reflected as the city lights fell away beneath them, she had somehow found something even more precious, a family who needed her as much as she needed them. The Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky as their plane began its descent. Emma had fallen asleep an hour into the flight, her head resting on Sarah's lap, Rosie clutched tightly in her arms. Looking down at the sleeping child, Sarah marveled at how quickly Emma had become the center of her world. "We're about to land, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. "We'll see your daddy soon." Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "Are we in Chicago?" "We are. Look at the lights." Sarah pointed to the window where the city sprawled beneath them, a grid of twinkling lights and dark patches where parks and the lake interrupted the urban landscape. "It's like stars on the ground," Emma murmured, pressing her face to the window. "Do you think Daddy's looking at the same lights?" "I'm sure he is," Sarah said, helping Emma buckle her seatbelt for landing. "He's probably watching for our plane right now." Alexander was waiting for them at the private terminal, his tall figure immediately recognizable even from a distance. The moment they were cleared to disembark, Emma raced down the stairs and across the tarmac, launching herself into her father's arms with a squeal of delight. "Daddy! We flew on a plane to surprise you!" Alexander caught her, spinning her around before hugging her tightly. "Best surprise ever, princess!" His eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head as she approached, carrying their overnight bags. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Sarah smiled, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction at the joy on both their faces. This had been the right decision, despite the last-minute complications and Mrs. Finch's barely concealed disapproval at the change in plans. "Welcome to Chicago," Alexander said as he set Emma down and took the bags from Sarah. "The car's waiting. I thought we'd go straight to the hotel. It's past someone's bedtime." "But I'm not tired," Emma protested, betrayed by the yawn that immediately followed. "And tomorrow's my birthday. I can stay up late on my birthday." "Tomorrow is your birthday," Alexander agreed, "which is why you need your rest tonight. We have big plans for tomorrow." In the car, Emma chattered excitedly about the cake they'd made and the decorations for her party, while Alexander listened with genuine interest, asking questions and expressing appropriate amazement at their accomplishments. "And Miss Sarah wrote a special rabbit princess birthday story," Emma added. "She's going to tell it at my party, but maybe she could tell it to you first, since you might miss the party?" Sarah saw Alexander wince slightly at the reminder. "I'm sure Miss Sarah is tired too," he said diplomatically. "Maybe tomorrow morning." The hotel was one of Chicago's finest, with a grand lobby of marble and gold. Alexander had reserved a suite with 2 bedrooms connected by a spacious living area. Emma, despite her protests of not being tired, fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow in the room she would share with Sarah. She was so excited, Sarah said as she joined Alexander in the living area, accepting the glass of wine he offered. I don't think she even noticed that we're missing the traditional bedtime story. Alexander smiled, loosening his tie and sinking onto the sofa with a sigh. She notices everything, but sometimes she's merciful enough not to point it out. He looked exhausted, the strain of the negotiations evident in the tight lines around his eyes and mouth. Rough day? Sarah asked, sitting in the armchair across from him. Henderson is being difficult. His investors are getting cold feet, and he's demanding additional guarantees that I'm not prepared to give. He took a long sip of his wine. But let's not talk about that. Tell me about the famous cake instead. Sarah described their baking adventures, including Mrs. Finch's unexpected decorating skills and Emma's increasingly elaborate design requests. Alexander listened, his expression softening as she spoke. You're remarkable, you know that? He said when she finished. Most people would have just ordered another cake from a different bakery, but you turned it into an experience Emma will remember forever. Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the praise. It wasn't just me. Mrs. Finch was surprisingly helpful once she got over her initial skepticism. Mrs. Finch has always been efficient, but warm and creative aren't words I'd use to describe her, Alexander replied with a slight smile. You've been good for her too, it seems. I think she just needed someone to share the responsibility of caring for Emma, Sarah suggested. It's been a lot for her since Caroline died. At the mention of his late wife, Alexander's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Yes, well, we've all had to adjust. Sarah sensed she'd touched a sensitive area and changed the subject. So what's the plan for tomorrow? Emma will be up at dawn, birthday excitement and all. I've arranged breakfast in the suite and a small gift-giving ceremony, Alexander said, visibly relieved at the shift in conversation. Then I thought we could take her to the Shed Aquarium for a couple of hours before your flight back. The negotiations don't resume until the afternoon. She'll love that, Sarah said. She's been learning about ocean animals in school. They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easily between them as it often did during their evening chats at home. Sarah noticed that Alexander seemed to relax gradually, the tension in his shoulders easing as they spoke. I should get some sleep, she said finally, setting down her empty glass. Emma will be bouncing on my bed before sunrise, birthday energy in full force. Alexander nodded, standing as she did. Sarah, he said as she turned to go, his voice softening. I really am grateful, not just for this, but for everything you've done for Emma, for us. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart flutter traitorously. It's my job, she said lightly, trying to maintain a professional distance even as something inside her longed to step closer to him. No, he said, shaking his head. It's far more than that, and we both know it. For a moment, they stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Alexander cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. Good night, Sarah. Sleep well. In the bedroom, Sarah changed quietly into her pajamas, careful not to wake Emma. As she slipped into the second bed, she found herself replaying that moment with Alexander, analyzing his words, his expression, the way he'd looked at her. Was she imagining the connection between them? Or was it possible that he felt it too, this growing attraction that she'd been trying so hard to ignore? Whatever it was, she reminded herself firmly, it couldn't go anywhere. She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood, her home. The power imbalance was too great, the potential for disaster too high. Emma needed stability, not complications. With that sobering thought, Sarah closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep and to dream of something, anything, other than Alexander Pierce's intense gaze and the way it made her feel. "Wake up! Wake up! It's my birthday!" Emma's excited voice pierced Sarah's dreams, followed by the bouncing of small knees on her mattress. "The sun is up and it's my birthday!" Sarah opened her eyes to find Emma's face inches from her own, blue eyes wide with excitement, golden curls already escaping from her braids. "Good morning, birthday girl," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "What time is it?" 6:32, Emma announced proudly. "I've been awake forever waiting for you." Sarah glanced at the clock and saw that it was indeed 6:32, earlier than Emma usually woke, but not unreasonable given the circumstances. "Happy birthday, sweetheart, 6 years old, you're practically grown up." "I know," Emma bounced again. "Can we wake Daddy now, please?" "Let's get dressed first," Sarah suggested, knowing Alexander had been up late working after their conversation. "Then we can surprise him with a birthday wake-up call." This compromise satisfied Emma, who rushed to get ready with none of her usual dawdling. Sarah helped her into the special birthday outfit they'd packed, a purple dress with silver stars that complemented the party theme, and fixed her hair with a silver ribbon. "You look beautiful," Sarah told her, genuinely moved by the sight of Emma twirling in her dress, face glowing with happiness. "Just like a princess." "A rabbit princess?" Emma asked hopefully. "The most beautiful rabbit princess in all the kingdom," Sarah confirmed, tapping her lightly on the nose. "Now, shall we go wake your father?" They found Alexander already awake and dressed, working at the desk in the living area. He looked up as they entered, his face breaking into a broad smile at the sight of Emma in her birthday finery. "There's my birthday princess," he exclaimed, opening his arms for Emma to run into. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "Thank you, Daddy. Do I get presents now or after breakfast?" Alexander laughed. "Such patience. How about one small present now and the rest after breakfast?" Emma readily agreed to this plan, bouncing with excitement as Alexander retrieved a small gift box from his suitcase. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with charms, a rabbit, a crown, a book, and a small heart. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, holding it reverently. "Look, Miss Sarah, the rabbit is for the rabbit princess, and the book is because I love stories, and the heart is for love." "It's lovely," Sarah agreed, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Your daddy chose perfect charms." Alexander helped Emma put on the bracelet, his large hands gentle as they fastened the clasp around her tiny wrist. "I have one more surprise for you," he said. "I've rearranged my meetings. I'm coming home with you and Miss Sarah today. I won't miss your party after all." Emma's squeal of delight echoed off the hotel walls as she threw her arms around her father's neck. "That's the best present ever." Over breakfast, delivered by room service with a special birthday cupcake for Emma, Alexander explained that he'd worked until the early hours of the morning to draft a compromise that had satisfied Henderson and his investors. "They accepted it?" Sarah asked, impressed. "Provisionally. We still need to iron out some details, but nothing that requires my physical presence." He smiled at Emma. "Some things are more important than business." Sarah felt a rush of warmth at his words. For a man whose reputation in the business world was one of ruthless focus and uncompromising standards, this willingness to prioritize his daughter's happiness was revealing. The Alexander Pierce she was coming to know was far more complex and caring than his public persona suggested. Their visit to the aquarium was a delight, with Emma racing from exhibit to exhibit, her excitement contagious. Alexander and Sarah followed more slowly, sometimes walking close enough that their hands would brush accidentally, sending a jolt of awareness through Sarah each time. "She's having a wonderful time," Sarah observed as they watched Emma press her face against the glass of the dolphin habitat, her expression rapt. "We all are," Alexander replied, his gaze on Sarah rather than Emma. "This was a brilliant idea. Thank you for suggesting it." Sarah shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "I just wanted her to have a special birthday." and to see you." "Mission accomplished," he said softly. Then, more hesitantly, "And you? Are you enjoying Chicago?" "What I've seen of it from the hotel to here, yes," she answered with a smile, "though I suspect the company matters more than the location." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes at that, a warmth, a question, perhaps both. Before he could respond, Emma called to them excitedly, pointing at a dolphin doing tricks, and the moment passed. On the private jet back to New York, Emma chattered happily about the aquarium and her upcoming party, her new bracelet jingling on her wrist as she gesticulated. Eventually, the excitement of the morning caught up with her, and she fell asleep between Sarah and Alexander, her head resting against her father's arm. "She's had quite an adventure," Sarah said softly, gazing fondly at the sleeping child. "But I think the fact that you're coming to her party means more to her than anything else." Alexander nodded, absently stroking Emma's hair. "I've missed too many important moments in the last 2 years, always putting work first. I'm trying to do better." "You are doing better," Sarah assured him. "Emma knows you love her." "Thanks to you," he said, meeting her eyes across Emma's sleeping form. "You've helped me see what really matters, Sarah. You've changed things for us. For me." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. This was dangerous territory, crossing the carefully maintained boundaries of their professional relationship. Yet Sarah couldn't bring herself to look away, to break whatever was building between them. "Alexander," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say but feeling that something needed to be acknowledged. "I know," he said quietly. "It's complicated. You work for me. Emma's well-being has to come first. But Sarah—" He hesitated, then reached across, his hand covering hers where it rested on the armrest. "What I'm feeling isn't just gratitude." Sarah's heart pounded as she looked at their hands, his larger one enveloping hers. She should pull away, maintain the professional distance that protected them both. Instead, she turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. "I know," she whispered. "For me too." They remained that way for the rest of the flight, hands joined in silent acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to fully voice, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, unaware of the subtle but significant shift taking place. As the plane began its descent into New York, Sarah gently withdrew her hand, reality reasserting itself. Whatever was developing between them, today was about Emma. Everything else would have to wait. But as they prepared to disembark, Alexander's hand briefly touched the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive, and Sarah knew that things had changed. For better or worse, they had crossed an invisible line, and there was no going back to the safe, clearly defined roles they'd established. The question now was where they would go from here, and how they would navigate these uncharted waters without hurting the little girl who depended on them both. The Pierce penthouse was transformed into a magical kingdom by the time they returned from Chicago. Mrs. Finch, with help from the party planners Alexander had hired, had outdone herself. Purple and silver decorations adorned every surface, and a table laden with presents stood in the corner of the living room. The handmade rabbit cake held pride of place on the dining table, surrounded by themed treats and party favors. "It's perfect," Emma gasped, spinning in circles to take it all in. "Just like I imagined!" Sarah exchanged a satisfied smile with Mrs. Finch, who nodded in acknowledgement of their joint success. The normally stoic housekeeper had unbent considerably over the past few months, and Sarah now considered her an ally, if not quite a friend. "The guests will be arriving in 2 hours," Mrs. Finch reminded them. "Plenty of time for the birthday girl to rest a bit before the excitement." "I don't need to rest," Emma protested, though her drooping eyelids suggested otherwise. The morning's adventure and the flight had clearly taken their toll. "How about a quiet story in your room then?" Sarah suggested. "The Rabbit Princess birthday story I wrote specially for today?" This compromise appealed to Emma, who allowed herself to be led to her bedroom for some downtime before her friends arrived. Alexander followed, seemingly as eager to hear the story as his daughter. In Emma's room, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, with Emma snuggled against her side and Alexander seated in the nearby rocking chair. As she began the tale of the Rabbit Princess's 6th birthday and the magical celebration in the enchanted forest, Sarah was acutely aware of Alexander's gaze on her, warm and appreciative. "The Rabbit Princess woke with the dawn," Sarah narrated, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a storyteller. "Today I am 6, she announced to her stuffed carrot. "A very important age indeed." Emma giggled at the mention of the stuffed carrot, a new addition to the story, inspired by Rosie. As the tale unfolded with the Rabbit Princess greeting animal friends who brought special birthday gifts, Emma's eyes grew heavier despite her determination to stay awake. "The greatest gift," said the wise old owl, "is not something you can hold in your paws, but something you hold in your heart. The love of family and friends who cherish you every day of the year, not just on your birthday." By the time Sarah concluded the story, with the Rabbit Princess making a special birthday wish that magically came true, a wish for her forest friends to always be together, Emma was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. "That was beautiful," Alexander said softly as they tiptoed from the room. "You have an extraordinary gift, Sarah." In the hallway they stood close, the narrow space bringing them within inches of each other. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words, the memory of their joined hands on the plane a tangible presence. "Alexander," Sarah began, not sure what she wanted to say but feeling that something needed to be addressed before the party began and the moment was lost. "I know," he said, his voice low. "We should talk about what happened on the plane." "Yes, but—" Sarah glanced toward the living area where Mrs. Finch could be heard arranging party supplies. "Now isn't the time." "Tonight," Alexander suggested. "After the party, after Emma's in bed. We'll talk then." Sarah nodded, both relieved and anxious at the postponement. "Tonight," she agreed. They moved apart just as Mrs. Finch appeared with a question about the party arrangements, the moment broken but the promise of later hanging between them like an unfinished melody. The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of final preparations. Alexander made several work calls while Sarah helped Mrs. Finch arrange the party favors. Small plush rabbits wearing silver crowns, each with a personalized thank you note for the guests. When Emma emerged from her nap, refreshed and bubbling with excitement, they helped her change into her party dress and fix her hair. Standing behind Emma at the mirror, fastening the silver ribbon that matched her bracelet, Sarah caught Alexander watching them, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. This was dangerous territory. She was becoming too attached, not just to Emma, which was already complicated enough, but to Alexander too. If things went wrong between them, it wouldn't just be her heart at stake, but Emma's as well. The little girl had already lost her mother. Sarah couldn't bear the thought of becoming another person who disappeared from her life. Before she could dwell on these concerns, the first guests arrived, and the penthouse filled with the excited voices of 6-year-olds and the more measured tones of their parents, many of whom seemed both impressed and intimidated by the Pierce residents. Sarah found herself naturally taking on the role of co-host, greeting parents alongside Alexander, helping to organize the children's activities, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Several of the mothers commented on what a lovely family they made, assumptions that Sarah gently but firmly corrected. "I'm Emma's nanny," she explained to one particularly persistent mother. "I've been with the family for a few months now." "Oh!" The woman looked surprised, then somewhat calculating as her gaze shifted to Alexander across the room. "So Mr. Pierce is still single?" "Mr. Pierce is focused on Emma," Sarah replied diplomatically, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The party games are about to start. Shall we join the children?" The party was a tremendous success. The children loved the Rabbit Princess theme, especially the story time where Sarah narrated a shortened version of the tale she'd told Emma earlier. Alexander had arranged for an actress in a rabbit costume to make an appearance, delighting the children and providing perfect photo opportunities. Throughout it all, Sarah was aware of Alexander's presence, his gaze finding hers across the room at key moments, when Emma blew out her candles, when she opened her presents, when she hugged her friends goodbye at the end of the afternoon. Each glance felt like a private communication, reinforcing the connection that had been acknowledged on the plane. By the time the last guest departed and Emma had been bathed and put to bed, exhausted but happy, Sarah felt as if she'd run an emotional marathon. She helped Mrs. Finch with the last of the cleanup, then found herself alone in the kitchen, gathering her thoughts before the promised conversation with Alexander. "Sarah?" His voice from the doorway made her start slightly. "Mrs. Finch has gone to her quarters for the evening. Would you join me for a glass of wine?" In the living room, most traces of the party had been cleared away, though a few stray purple balloons still floated near the ceiling. Alexander handed her a glass of red wine and gestured for her to sit on the sofa while he took the armchair opposite, maintaining a deliberate distance between them. "Emma had a wonderful day," Sarah said, sipping her wine and trying to calm her nerves. "She'll remember this birthday for a long time." "Thanks to you," Alexander replied. "Your story, your ideas for the party, you made it special in ways I never could have." Sarah shook her head. "You're selling yourself short. The Chicago surprise, the bracelet, the rabbit princess actress, those were all your contributions." "We make a good team," he said, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his glass. "That's part of what I wanted to talk about." Sarah took another sip of wine, waiting for him to continue, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. "What I said on the plane, what I feel for you. It's real, Sarah." Alexander's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was exerting. "I haven't felt this way about anyone since Caroline died. To be honest, I didn't think I would ever feel this way again." Sarah's breath caught. "Alexander, Please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I need to say this clearly. I'm attracted to you, deeply attracted, and I think you feel something similar. But I'm also your employer, and there's Emma to consider." "That's what concerns me too," Sarah admitted. "If we were to explore these feelings and it didn't work out, I'd have to leave, and that would hurt Emma." "It would," he agreed. "She adores you. You've become essential to her happiness, to her healing." "So where does that leave us?" Sarah asked, setting down her glass, suddenly needing her hands to be empty, unoccupied. Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about this since the moment I realized how I felt. I believe we have two options. The first is to acknowledge these feelings but agree not to act on them, to maintain a strictly professional relationship for Emma's sake." Sarah nodded slowly. It was the sensible choice, the safe choice. "And the second option?" "The second is to move very carefully, very slowly, and see if what we're feeling has the potential to become something real and lasting. Something that would eventually be good for Emma too, not just for us." The implication of his words, the possibility of a future together, not just as employer and employee but as partners, perhaps even as a family, sent a tremor through Sarah. "That's a significant step to consider," she said carefully. "We've only known each other a few months." "I know," Alexander acknowledged, "and I'm not suggesting we rush into anything. But I also don't want to pretend these feelings don't exist. That kind of denial creates its own tension, which Emma would sense eventually." He was right about that. Children were perceptive, and Emma particularly so. Trying to ignore or suppress their attraction might actually create more complications than addressing it openly. "What are you proposing exactly?" Sarah asked. Alexander set his own glass down and met her gaze directly. "Transparency, honesty. We acknowledge what's happening between us and agree to explore it cautiously, always with Emma's well-being as our priority. If at any point it seems like it's not working or it's affecting Emma negatively, we step back." "And if it does work?" Sarah couldn't help asking, hope and fear tangling in her chest. A smile touched Alexander's lips. Then we'll have something rare and precious. A second chance at happiness for all three of us. The weight of the decision pressed on Sarah. This wasn't just about her feelings for Alexander, or even his for her. It was about Emma, about the fragile trust the little girl had placed in her, about the stability she'd worked so hard to create in the Pierce household. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Alexander nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah." The simple statement, with its implicit promise of patience and permanence, touched something deep inside her. After so many losses, so much uncertainty, the idea that someone wasn't going anywhere was almost too precious to believe. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." They finished their wine in companionable silence, the question between them acknowledged but not yet answered. When Sarah rose to go to her room, Alexander stood as well, maintaining the respectful distance he'd established. "Good night, Sarah," he said. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I respect you enormously, as Emma's nanny, as a storyteller, as a woman who has faced adversity with remarkable grace." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Good night, Alexander," she replied, her voice slightly unsteady. "And thank you for trusting me with your feelings. I know that isn't easy for you." In her room, Sarah changed into her night clothes and sat at the window seat, looking out at the city lights. So much had changed in the few months since Alexander had found her cleaning Emma's stuffed rabbit in the park. From homeless and hopeless to, what? A woman with a home, a purpose, and now the possibility of love. It seemed too good to be true, like one of her own fairy tales. In stories, the magical transformation was always permanent, the happy ending assured. Real life was messier, more unpredictable. Real love came with real risks. Yet as she watched the stars appear over the city, Sarah found herself remembering the words she'd written for the Rabbit Princess. "Sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we're brave enough to open our hearts." She'd written those words for Emma, but perhaps they were meant for her as well. A reminder that courage wasn't just about surviving hardship, but about embracing joy when it appeared, even if that joy came with uncertainty. Alexander was offering her a chance at something she'd thought lost forever. The question was whether she was brave enough to take it, knowing that this time the stakes included not just her heart, but the heart of a little girl who had already lost too much. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the quiet of the penthouse, feeling the strange new sensation of being exactly where she belonged, yet standing at the edge of an unknown future. Whatever she decided, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. In her room down the hall, Emma slept peacefully, her new bracelet carefully placed on her nightstand, Rosie clutched in her arms, her dreams filled with rabbit princesses and birthday wishes come true. Unaware of the adult complexities unfolding around her, she rested in the simple certainty of being loved. By her father, by Sarah, by the memory of her mother that they both helped her keep alive. That love, Sarah realized as she finally slipped into bed, was the foundation upon which any decision must be built. Whatever path she and Alexander chose, Emma's heart would always be their true north, guiding them toward what was right, what was needed, what was best. With that thought providing a measure of peace, Sarah drifted toward sleep, her mind still turning over possibilities, weighing risks against rewards, fears against hopes. Tomorrow would bring clarity, she told herself. Tomorrow she would know what to do. But in her heart, as sleep finally claimed her, Sarah suspected she already knew her answer. Had known it, perhaps, from the moment Alexander's hand had covered hers on the plane, acknowledging the connection that had been growing between them since that snowy day in the park. Some journeys once begun could not be abandoned halfway. Some stories once started demanded to be finished, and some feelings once recognized could not be denied, no matter how complicated they might make the future. February in New York brought heavy snow and slate-gray skies, but inside Sarah's room at the Pierce penthouse, spring seemed to be blooming. Her manuscript, the first book in the Rabbit Princess series, was complete, and she'd just received an email from Alexander's publishing contact expressing enthusiastic interest. "They want to see the rest of the series as soon as possible," she read aloud, still hardly believing the words. "They think it has tremendous commercial potential while maintaining literary quality and emotional depth." It had been a week since Emma's birthday, a week since Alexander had laid his feelings bare and offered her a choice. Sarah had asked for time, and true to his word, he had given it to her, maintaining a respectful distance while they continued their daily routines. Now, staring at the email that represented another dream potentially coming true, Sarah felt the last of her hesitation melting away. Life had taken everything from her once, her mother, her job, her home. But it had also given her a second chance, not just professionally, but personally. Was she really going to let fear keep her from embracing that chance? Her decision made, Sarah saved the email and left her room, determined to find Alexander. It was Saturday morning and he'd taken Emma ice skating in Central Park. They'd invited Sarah to join them, but she'd declined, needing the quiet time to finish reviewing her manuscript before sending it off. Now, though, she needed to be with them. Grabbing her coat and scarf, she headed for the elevator, texting Alexander to let him know she was on her way. The park was crowded with weekend visitors enjoying the winter wonderland. Sarah spotted Alexander and Emma immediately, his tall figure steady and sure on the ice, holding Emma's mittened hands as she wobbled and giggled, her purple hat bobbing as she concentrated on staying upright. Sarah watched them for a moment, her heart full. They were both so precious to her, in such different yet complementary ways. Emma with her innocent trust and resilient spirit, Alexander with his quiet strength and unexpected tenderness. She approached the rink's edge, waving to catch their attention. Emma noticed her first, her face lighting up with delight. "Miss Sarah, you came! Daddy, look!" Alexander looked up, his expression transforming when he saw her. Even from a distance, the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. He guided Emma carefully to the rink's edge where Sarah waited. "This is a nice surprise," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Change your mind about skating?" "Change my mind about a few things," Sarah replied, her meaning clear in the way she held his gaze. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, hope kindling behind his careful restraint. "Emma, how about some hot chocolate? I think we've had enough skating for one morning." "With extra marshmallows?" Emma negotiated, oblivious to the charged atmosphere between the adults. "As many as they'll give you," Alexander agreed with a smile. At a nearby cafe, they found a quiet corner table. Emma, happily occupied with a hot chocolate topped with a mountain of whipped cream and marshmallows, didn't notice when Sarah placed her hand deliberately on the table, palm up, an invitation. Alexander hesitated only briefly before covering her hand with his, their fingers interlacing naturally as they had on the plane. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Sarah that had nothing to do with her steaming cup of tea. "You've made your decision," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. Sarah nodded. "I want to try, Alexander. Carefully, as you said, with Emma's well-being always our priority. But I don't want to pretend these feelings don't exist either." His fingers tightened around hers, relief and joy washing over his features. "I was beginning to think I'd scared you off." "You did scare me," she admitted with a small smile. "Not because of your feelings, but because of mine. It's been a long time since I've let myself be this vulnerable." "For me too," he said softly. "After Caroline died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused entirely on Emma and the business. I wasn't looking for this." "Neither was I," Sarah replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Daddy, why are you holding Miss Sarah's hand?" Emma's voice broke into their private moment, her observant eyes having finally registered the change between them. Alexander didn't pull away, though Sarah felt him tense slightly. This was the first test of their new understanding, how to explain to Emma in a way that wouldn't confuse or upset her. "Miss Sarah and I care about each other very much," Alexander said carefully. "Just like we both care about you." Emma considered this, her head tilted thoughtfully. "Like how you cared about Mommy." Sarah held her breath, but Alexander answered calmly, "Your Mommy will always have a special place in my heart, and in yours. No one could ever replace her. But it's possible to care deeply for more than one person in your life." "Like how I love you and Mommy and Miss Sarah and Rosie?" Emma asked. Alexander smiled, visibly relieved at her understanding. "Yes, sweetheart. Very much like that." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Does this mean Miss Sarah will stay with us forever and ever?" Now it was Sarah's turn to tense. Forever was a big word, especially this early in whatever was developing between them. "It means we all care about each other and want to be together," Sarah answered diplomatically. "But big decisions like forever take time." "But you're not going away," Emma pressed, a hint of anxiety creeping into her voice. "No, Emma," Sarah assured her firmly. "I'm not going away." This seemed to satisfy the little girl, who returned her attention to the remaining marshmallows in her cup, apparently unconcerned with the adult complexities surrounding the situation. Sarah caught Alexander's eye over Emma's head, seeing her own mix of relief and caution reflected there. The first hurdle had been cleared more easily than either had expected, but they both knew there would be others ahead. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and Alexander stood on the penthouse balcony, despite the cold. The city sprawled below them, a carpet of twinkling lights under the clear winter sky. "She took it well," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Better than I expected," Alexander agreed, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "But Emma surprises me sometimes with her resilience. She's been through so much, yet she still opens her heart so easily." "Children are naturally hopeful," Sarah observed. "It's one of the things I love about writing for them. They believe in possibilities." Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "And what about you, Sarah? Do you believe in possibilities?" "I'm learning to," she replied honestly. "It hasn't been easy, after everything. But yes, I'm beginning to believe again." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with the February chill. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded, her heart racing as he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and restrained, a promise rather than a demand. She responded in kind, her hands coming to rest lightly on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his sweater. When they parted, Alexander kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," he confessed. "Me too," she admitted, surprised at how natural it felt to be in his arms, as if some part of her had been waiting for precisely this moment. They stayed on the balcony a while longer, talking quietly about practical matters, how they would proceed, what boundaries they would maintain while Emma adjusted to the shift in their relationship, how they would handle the inevitable complications of their employer-employee status. "I've been thinking about that," Alexander said when Sarah raised concerns about the power imbalance between them. "What if we changed that dynamic?" "What do you mean?" "Your book is being published. You don't need to be Emma's nanny anymore. You could be a writer who lives with us. Or," he added carefully, "you could get your own place if that would make you more comfortable. I could help you find an apartment. Get you set up until the book royalties start coming in? Sarah considered this, touched by his understanding of her need for independence. I don't want to leave Emma, she said finally. Or you. But I do think we need to redefine my role here. I can't be your employee and your, whatever this is becoming. Partner, Alexander supplied, the word carrying weight and promise. And I agree. We'll work out the details. The important thing is that we're both committed to trying. As they returned indoors, the warmth of the penthouse enveloping them after the frigid balcony, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. There were still uncertainties ahead, still potential pitfalls, but for the first time in years, she was facing the future with hope rather than dread. The next few weeks brought changes both subtle and significant. Sarah and Alexander moved cautiously, keeping their developing relationship low-key around Emma while allowing themselves private moments to explore their feelings for each other. Evening conversations over tea expanded to include gentle touches, shared confidences, and increasingly passionate goodnight kisses. Sarah's manuscript was officially accepted by the publisher, with a contract that included a modest advance for the first 3 books in the series. The amount wasn't life-changing, but it represented freedom, a chance to establish herself professionally again, to contribute rather than just receive. We should celebrate, Alexander declared when the signed contract arrived. Dinner out, somewhere special. What about Emma? Sarah asked, though she was touched by his enthusiasm. Mrs. Finch can watch her for a few hours. It's important that we have some time for just us, Sarah. His expression grew more serious. I want to do this right. Build something real, not just convenient. And so, on a crisp March evening, Sarah found herself dressed in one of Caroline's designer dresses, something that still felt strange but was gradually becoming less uncomfortable, being escorted by Alexander to one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. You look beautiful, he told her as they were seated at a secluded corner table, candlelight flickering between them. That color suits you. Sarah smoothed the deep green fabric self-consciously. Thank you, though I still feel a bit like I'm playing dress-up sometimes. You're not, he assured her. You belong here, Sarah. With me. The conviction in his voice touched her deeply. Alexander had a way of making her feel valued, not despite her past struggles, but including them. As if her journey, with all its hardships, was part of what he admired about her. Over dinner, they talked more freely than they could at home, without the need to monitor their words for little ears or Mrs. Finch's observant presence. Alexander shared stories from his early career, the risks he'd taken to build Pierce Enterprises, the mentors who had guided him. Sarah spoke of her childhood dreams of becoming a writer, her mother's unwavering support, the first story she'd ever had published in a university literary magazine. Tell me about Caroline, Sarah said gently as their desserts arrived. If that's okay? Alexander looked surprised but not upset by the question. What would you like to know? Anything you want to share. She's such an important part of your life, of Emma's life. I'd like to understand her better. He was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Caroline was vibrant, full of life and ideas. We met in college. She was studying art history. I was in business. Everyone thought we were mismatched, but we balanced each other. She taught me to see beauty in things I'd overlooked. I taught her to be a bit more practical. Sarah listened, noting the warmth in his voice, the absence of the raw pain that had been there when he'd spoken of Caroline in the early days of their acquaintance. She would have liked you, he said suddenly, surprising Sarah. Your creativity, your resilience. She always said I needed more imaginative people in my life. I wish I could have known her, Sarah said sincerely. In a way you do, through Emma. She's so much like her mother sometimes it takes my breath away. He reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand. Thank you for asking about her. Most people avoid the subject, thinking it will upset me. She'll always be part of your life, part of who you are, Sarah said. Pretending otherwise wouldn't be honest, and I want honesty between us, Alexander." "So do I," he agreed, his thumb caressing her palm. "Complete honesty." As they left the restaurant, snow began to fall gently, dusting the city streets with crystalline white. Alexander pulled Sarah close, his arm around her waist as they waited for their car. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarah Walker," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I think I've been falling since that day in the park, when you cleaned Emma's rabbit and made her smile for the first time in months." Sarah turned in his embrace, looking up at him as snowflakes caught in his dark hair. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing, "and it terrifies me almost as much as it thrills me." "Why?" he asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "Because now I have something precious to lose again," she whispered. "Something even more valuable than what I lost before." Instead of answering with words, Alexander kissed her, there in the falling snow, his arms holding her as if she were something infinitely precious. Sarah melted into him, letting the kiss deepen, letting herself believe fully for the first time that this happiness might last, that she deserved it, that they all did. When they returned home, Mrs. Finch informed them that Emma had gone to bed without fuss, though she'd insisted on waiting up as long as possible to hear about their evening. "She was quite excited about your special dinner," the housekeeper remarked, her tone neutral but her eyes knowing. "Said it was like a fairy tale." "Thank you for watching her, Mrs. Finch," Alexander said. "How did she seem? Any concerns?" "Happy," Mrs. Finch replied simply. "She seems secure. It's good to see." After the housekeeper had retired to her quarters, Sarah and Alexander stood in the dimly lit living room, the magic of the evening still surrounding them like an enchantment neither wanted to break. "I should say goodnight," Sarah said reluctantly, aware of the boundaries they'd established. Alexander nodded, though his eyes told her he wished for more. "Good night, Sarah. Thank you for a wonderful evening." He kissed her once more, tenderly, before they parted to their separate rooms. As Sarah changed out of the elegant dress and into her pajamas, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by the transformation. Not just in her external circumstances, though those had certainly changed dramatically, but in her very being. The woman who looked back at her was not the same one who had sat hopeless on that park bench months ago. This Sarah stood straighter, her eyes bright with purpose and joy, her heart open to possibilities she'd thought forever lost. "Happiness," she whispered to her reflection, testing the word like a new language. "This is happiness." And for the first time in years, Sarah Walker fell asleep without a single worry about tomorrow, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, she would face it surrounded by love, both the love she received and the love she had to give. Spring arrived in New York with a burst of green in Central Park, and new beginnings for the unlikely family that had formed in the Pierce penthouse. Sarah's first Rabbit Princess book was slated for publication in the fall, with illustrations that captured the whimsical world she had created. Alexander's business was thriving, the Henderson merger having finally been completed successfully, and Emma, now halfway through kindergarten, was blossoming, her nightmares less frequent, her smile more readily given. On a sunny April morning, Sarah sat at her desk reviewing the final illustrations for her book when Emma burst into her room, waving a piece of paper excitedly. "Miss Sarah, look what I made in art class!" Sarah turned, smiling at the little girl's enthusiasm. "Let's see this masterpiece." Emma proudly displayed a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands, a tall man in a suit, a woman with long hair, and a small girl between them. Above them, floating in a blue sky, was a 4th figure with wings and a yellow halo. "That's Daddy, and you and me," Emma explained, pointing to each figure. "And that's Mommy in heaven, watching over us." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "It's beautiful, Emma. Absolutely beautiful." "Mrs. Wilson asked us to draw our families," Emma continued. Lucy drew her mom and dad and baby brother, and Michael drew his two moms, and I drew us. Mrs. Wilson said families come in lots of different ways. Mrs. Wilson is very wise, Sarah agreed, studying the picture more closely. May I keep this? I'd like to frame it. Emma nodded solemnly. I made it for you, to say thank you. Thank you? For what, sweetheart? For making Daddy smile again, and for being my friend. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, overwhelmed by the simple, profound acceptance in the child's words and drawing. Emma saw them as a family, not a replacement for what she'd lost, but a new configuration that included her mother's memory while embracing the present. Later that evening, Sarah showed the drawing to Alexander as they sat together on the balcony, enjoying the mild spring night. Their relationship had deepened over the past month, finding a comfortable rhythm that balanced their growing intimacy with their responsibilities to Emma. She sees us as a family, Alexander said softly, his finger tracing the crayon figures. All of us, including Caroline. Is that okay? Sarah asked, watching his face carefully. More than okay, he assured her, taking her hand. It's what I've hoped for, that Emma could hold on to her mother's memory while also accepting you in her life. In our lives. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Finch, who appeared at the balcony door with an unusual expression of concern. Mr. Pierce, there's something you should see. She handed him a tablet open to the website of a prominent New York gossip column. The headline made Sarah's stomach drop. Billionaire's Cinderella. Homeless woman lands Pierce heir and book deal. Beneath the headline was a photo of Sarah and Alexander leaving the restaurant where they'd had dinner a few weeks earlier, his arm around her waist, their expressions intimate. The article itself was worse, a sensationalized account of how Sarah had gone from park bench to penthouse by catching the eye of widowed billionaire Alexander Pierce. How did they get this information? Alexander demanded, his face darkening with anger as he scrolled through the article. They have details about Sarah's past, about her book deal. Martha, Sarah whispered, realization dawning. I've been keeping in touch with Martha from the shelter. I told her about the book, about us. She must have talked to a reporter. Mrs. Finch cleared her throat. There are already calls coming in from other media outlets requesting comments, and Mr. Ramirez called to say there are photographers gathering downstairs. Alexander's security chief had become a more frequent presence since their relationship had evolved, though his primary focus remained Emma's safety rather than managing media interest. Thank you, Mrs. Finch, Alexander said, his voice controlled but tight with tension. Please make sure Emma doesn't see any of this and inform the doormen not to allow any press into the building. After Mrs. Finch left, Sarah read the article more carefully, each word like a physical blow. The piece painted her as a calculating opportunist who had targeted the vulnerable widower and his daughter, using the child to get close to the father. It insinuated that her book deal was a result of Alexander's influence rather than her own talent. Alexander, I'm so sorry, she said, feeling sick. I never thought Martha would— This isn't your fault, he interrupted firmly. You've done nothing wrong. These gossip rags make their money by twisting innocent situations into scandals. But they're making it sound like I seduced you for your money, like I'm using you and Emma. Nobody who knows us would believe that for a second. He took the tablet from her hands and set it aside, then cupped her face gently. Sarah, look at me. This changes nothing between us. It's an annoying invasion of privacy, but it'll blow over. Sarah wanted to believe him, but anxiety gnawed at her. She'd been so focused on Emma's reaction to their relationship that she hadn't considered how the outside world might perceive it, how the stark contrast between their circumstances might appear to strangers. The next morning brought a flurry of new articles, each seeming to build on the previous ones with increasingly speculative details about Sarah's past and her relationship with Alexander. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from the shelter, from her new editor, even from former colleagues who had recognized her in the stories. Alexander handled it with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to public scrutiny, instructing his PR team to issue a dignified no comment while his legal department monitored for anything actionable. But Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't since her darkest days of homelessness. "They're calling me a gold digger," she said, showing Alexander a particularly vicious comment thread on a social media post about them. "They're saying I targeted you when you were grieving, that I'm using Emma to secure my position." "And none of it is true," Alexander insisted, his arm around her shoulders as they sat in his home office, away from Emma's curious ears. "The people who matter know the truth, Sarah." But the controversy was beginning to affect Emma, too. The next afternoon, she came home from school in tears, clinging to Mrs. Finch's hand. "What happened?" Sarah asked, alarmed at the child's distress. "Some of the other children were saying unkind things," Mrs. Finch explained delicately, "about Miss Sarah and Mr. Pierce." Emma broke away from Mrs. Finch and ran to Sarah, burying her face against her. "Lucy said you only pretend to like me so you can marry Daddy and get his money," she sobbed. "And Michael said you're not really part of our family." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she knelt to hold Emma. "Those are very hurtful things to hear," she said carefully. "But they're not true, Emma. I love you for you, not for any other reason." "Then why are people saying mean things about you? About us?" Sarah looked helplessly at Mrs. Finch, uncertain how to explain the complexities of public perception and class prejudice to a 6-year-old. "Sometimes people don't understand things that are different from what they're used to," she tried. "They make up stories to explain what they don't understand. Like how the villagers didn't understand the rabbit princess at first, because she looked different?" Emma asked, her tears subsiding slightly. "Exactly like that," Sarah agreed, touched by Emma's connection to her stories. "Remember how the rabbit princess proved herself by her actions, not her appearance?" Emma nodded. "And then they saw she was kind and brave, and they weren't afraid anymore." "That's what will happen with us too," Sarah assured her, hoping it was true. "People will see the truth eventually." But as the days passed, the media interest only intensified. A particularly enterprising reporter tracked down Sarah's former supervisor at Callaway Publishing, who provided a quote about her emotional fragility after her mother's death. Another article featured an interview with a former neighbor who claimed Sarah had been unstable before losing her apartment. The constant scrutiny began to strain not just Sarah's nerves but her relationship with Alexander. She found herself pulling away, reluctant to be seen with him in public, second-guessing her place in his world. "Maybe I should move out for a while," she suggested one night after Emma was asleep. "Just until this dies down. It might be better for Emma." "That's exactly what they want," Alexander argued, pacing the living room with barely contained frustration. "To drive a wedge between us, to make you doubt yourself and us." "But Emma is being teased at school. Your business associates are whispering. Even my publisher called to ask if the publicity would affect the book release." "So we fight back," Alexander insisted. "Not by hiding or separating, but by showing the world who you really are." "How?" Sarah asked, exhausted by the constant defense of her character, her motives, her very presence in the Pierce family. Alexander sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Your book. The publication date is still months away, but what if we moved it up? Released it now, while people are paying attention?" Sarah shook her head. "The illustrations aren't finished. The marketing plan, details that can be accelerated with the right resources," Alexander countered. "Let people see your talent, your heart. Let them read the stories that captured Emma's imagination, that helped her heal after losing her mother." "You think a children's book will change people's minds about me being a gold digger?" "I think the truth has power," he said simply. "And your stories are truth wrapped in magic, Sarah. They reveal who you are more authentically than any interview or statement could." The next morning they were having breakfast when Emma suddenly set down her spoon and looked at Sarah with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Are you going to leave us because people are being mean?" she asked, her voice small but direct. Sarah exchanged a startled glance with Alexander. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" "I heard you talking last night about moving out." Emma's lower lip trembled. "Please don't go, Miss Sarah. I need you. We need you." Sarah moved to kneel beside Emma's chair, taking her small hands. "Emma, I'm not going anywhere. I was worried that the mean things people are saying might be hurting you, but running away won't solve anything." "The rabbit princess doesn't run away when things get hard," Emma said firmly. "She stays and makes things better. That's what you should do too." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. Emma was right. Running away wouldn't solve anything. It would only confirm the narrative others had created about her, about them. "You're absolutely right," she agreed, looking up to find Alexander watching them with a mixture of pride and love. "The rabbit princess faces her challenges, and so will we, together." That afternoon, Sarah called her editor and agreed to Alexander's suggestion of accelerating the book's publication. She also accepted an invitation she'd been avoiding, to be Alexander's date at a high-profile charity gala the following weekend. "Are you sure?" he asked when she told him her decision. "There will be press there, photographers." "I'm sure," Sarah said, newfound determination strengthening her voice. "It's time I stopped hiding and showed them who I really am, who we really are." As she spoke the words, Sarah felt something shift inside her, the last vestiges of shame and insecurity giving way to a quiet confidence. She had survived homelessness, had rebuilt her life from nothing, had helped a grieving child find joy again. She had nothing to apologize for, nothing to hide. The story of her relationship with Alexander wasn't a scandal or a calculation. It was something rare and precious that had grown from a simple act of kindness in the snow. And no amount of tabloid speculation could diminish the truth of what they'd found together. That night, as she helped Emma with her bedtime routine, the little girl asked her to tell a new rabbit princess story, one where the princess faced mean villagers who didn't believe she was really a princess. "And does she convince them?" Sarah asked, curious about Emma's expectations. Emma shook her head, her expression serious beyond her years. "She doesn't need to. She knows she's a princess inside where it matters, and the people who love her know it too. That's enough." Looking into Emma's trusting eyes, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for this child's wisdom and the unconditional acceptance she offered. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would surely be more, they would face them, as Emma had said, together, as a family bound by choice and love rather than convention. The night of the charity gala arrived with clear skies and a gentle spring breeze. In her room, Sarah stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the elegant midnight blue gown Alexander had insisted on buying her for the occasion. "It's not a disguise," he had said when she'd protested the expense. "It's armor." Now, as she fastened Caroline's diamond earrings, a loan from Alexander that had touched her deeply, Sarah understood what he'd meant. Tonight wasn't about pretending to be someone she wasn't, but about facing the world as the person she had become. A writer, a mother figure to Emma, and a woman in love with Alexander Pierce. A soft knock at the door was followed by Emma's voice. "Miss Sarah? Daddy says it's almost time to go, but I wanted to give you something first." Sarah opened the door to find Emma in her pajamas, Mrs. Finch hovering discreetly in the background. In her small hands, Emma held a slightly crushed purple flower. "It's for your dress," Emma explained earnestly. "Like a corsage. Daddy said you might want something borrowed and something blue for good luck, but your dress is already blue, so I thought you might need something purple instead." Sarah knelt carefully, mindful of her dress. "It's perfect, Emma. Exactly what I needed. Will you help me pin it on?" With Mrs. Finch's assistance, they secured the flower to Sarah's dress, the vibrant purple standing out beautifully against the midnight blue. "Now you look like a queen," Emma declared, satisfied with her contribution. a queen who writes about rabbit princesses. Sarah hugged her, breathing in the clean, child-sweet scent of her freshly washed hair. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll think of you the whole time I'm gone." "I know," Emma said with the easy confidence of a child who feels securely loved. "Daddy said you're both coming to kiss me goodnight when you get home, even if I'm asleep." "We wouldn't miss it," Sarah promised. When she emerged from her room to join Alexander in the foyer, his reaction made all her anxiety momentarily fade. He stood motionless, his eyes traveling from her carefully styled hair to the purple flower at her waist, his expression one of undisguised admiration. "You are breathtaking," he said simply. "The flower was Emma's idea," Sarah explained, touching it gently. "My something purple for luck." Alexander smiled, drawing her close for a brief, tender kiss. "We make our own luck, Sarah Walker, together." The car ride to the gala was quiet, both of them lost in thought as the city lights streamed past. The venue was one of New York's grand old hotels, its ballroom transformed for the evening into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. As they pulled up to the entrance, Sarah could see the row of photographers and reporters waiting behind velvet ropes. "Ready?" Alexander asked, taking her hand. Sarah took a deep breath. "Ready." The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, camera flashes erupted like lightning. Sarah held tightly to Alexander's arm, maintaining the poised smile they had practiced at home. She could hear the questions being called out, some respectful, others deliberately provocative, but Alexander guided her forward without stopping, his hand warm and steady against her back. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted from frenzied to merely curious. Heads turned as they entered, conversations pausing briefly before resuming with increased animation. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of assessing gazes, measuring her against their expectations of who should stand beside one of New York's most eligible widowers. "Alexander, there you are!" A distinguished older woman approached them, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo. "And this must be the writer we've been hearing so much about." "Margaret," Alexander greeted her warmly. "Yes, this is Sarah Walker. Sarah, Margaret Hollingsworth, chairwoman of the Children's Literacy Foundation we're supporting tonight." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Sarah said, extending her hand. "The foundation's work is remarkable." "As is yours, from what I hear," Margaret replied, her sharp eyes appraising Sarah with open interest. "Alexander sent me an advance copy of your book. The Rabbit Princess, yes? Utterly charming, and with real emotional depth. Exactly the kind of children's literature we advocate for." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You've read it?" "Not only read it, my dear, but championed it. Why do you think you're seated at the head table tonight?" Margaret smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "Alexander isn't the only one with connections in publishing." As the evening progressed, Sarah discovered that Margaret wasn't the only one who had received an advance copy of her book. Several key figures in the literary and philanthropic circles present had been strategically provided with the Rabbit Princess manuscript, and all seemed genuinely impressed with her work. "You orchestrated this," she whispered to Alexander during a quiet moment between courses. "You made sure people knew me for my writing before they met me." "I simply ensured you had a fair introduction," he replied, his fingers interlacing with hers beneath the table. "The rest is all you, Sarah. Your talent, your heart on those pages." By the time Alexander was called to the podium to present his foundation's annual donation, the whispers following Sarah had transformed from speculative to respectful. When he acknowledged her from the stage, "My partner, whose work with children's literature embodies the mission we celebrate tonight," the applause seemed genuine, untainted by the scandal that had dominated the past weeks. Later, as they danced slowly beneath the ballroom's crystal chandeliers, Sarah felt a burden lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured against Alexander's shoulder. for believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." His arms tightened around her. "That works both ways, you know. You and Emma. You gave me back my faith in second chances, in new beginnings." They swayed together, the music surrounding them like a cocoon of privacy in the crowded room. For this moment, there were no photographers, no gossip columnists, no skeptical socialites, just two people who had found each other against all odds, holding on tightly to the precious gift of their connection. The days following the gala brought a shift in the media narrative. Photographs of Sarah and Alexander dancing appeared in society pages, but the accompanying articles focused on her upcoming book and their shared commitment to children's causes rather than the circumstances of their meeting. Sarah's publishers, sensing the changing tide, accelerated production even further, announcing a release date just 3 weeks away. "They're calling it a publishing phenomenon," Sarah told Alexander one evening, showing him the pre-order rankings that had her book climbing steadily up the children's literature charts. "Apparently controversy sells." "Quality sells," Alexander corrected, pulling her close on the sofa where they sat reviewing the day's news coverage. "The controversy just got people's attention. Your writing is what's keeping it." The book's actual release exceeded even the publisher's optimistic projections. The Rabbit Princess debuted at number 3 on the children's bestseller list, with critics praising its emotional intelligence and refreshing approach to conflict resolution. A prominent child psychologist endorsed it as essential reading for children navigating loss and change, adding fuel to the growing momentum. But the most meaningful review came from Emma herself, who proudly brought home a project from school where each student had written about their favorite book. "I picked The Rabbit Princess," she announced, showing Sarah her carefully printed paragraph. "Mrs. Wilson read it to our whole class, and now everyone wants to read it too. Lucy said it's better than her Frozen book, and that's her favorite thing ever." "That," Sarah told Alexander later, "is worth more than any bestseller list or critical acclaim." As spring deepened toward summer, life in the Pierce household settled into a new rhythm. Sarah's position evolved from nanny to partner in every sense, her relationship with Alexander growing stronger through the challenges they'd weathered together. Emma thrived under their united care. Her occasional questions about her mother met with honest, loving responses that integrated Caroline's memory into their daily lives, rather than treating it as a separate, sacred territory. On a warm June evening, almost exactly 6 months after their first meeting in the park, Alexander suggested they take a walk after dinner. Emma was having a sleepover at a friend's house, her social life having blossomed once the media scrutiny died down, leaving them with a rare evening to themselves. "The park?" Sarah asked as they left the building, noting the direction Alexander was guiding them. "I thought it might be nice," he replied with a smile that suggested more than a casual stroll. The park was peaceful in the golden light of early evening, families packing up picnics, joggers making final circuits of the paths, the occasional street performer drawing small crowds. Alexander led Sarah to a familiar area, and she realized with a sudden clarity where they were headed. "Our bench," she said softly as it came into view, the same bench where she had first cleaned Emma's rabbit, where their story had begun on a snowy December day. Alexander nodded, a hint of nervousness visible beneath his usual confidence. "I thought it was appropriate." They sat together, watching the sun cast long shadows across the grass. Sarah's mind flashed back to that first day. How cold she had been, how hopeless, how unimaginable this future would have seemed. "I've been thinking a lot about journeys lately," Alexander said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "How we never really know where they'll lead us or who we'll meet along the way. Some journeys are worth every difficult step," Sarah replied, understanding instinctively where this conversation was heading, her heart beginning to race. Alexander turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "6 months ago, I was existing, not living, going through the motions for Emma's sake but hollow inside. And then you appeared, with your kindness and your stories, and suddenly there was color in our world again. "Alexander," Sarah whispered, emotion making it difficult to speak. "Let me finish," he said gently, squeezing her hands. "I've learned not to take time for granted, Sarah. Life can change in an instant, sometimes tragically, but sometimes miraculously too." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I don't want to waste another day without making it clear to you, to Emma, to the world, exactly what you mean to us." Opening the box, he revealed a ring unlike any Sarah had expected. Not a traditional diamond solitaire, but an antique setting with a deep purple amethyst surrounded by smaller diamonds. "Purple for the rabbit princess," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "And for Emma's flower, for the stories that brought us together, for new beginnings," Alexander added. "Sarah Walker, will you marry me? Will you officially become the family that you already are in our hearts?" "Yes," Sarah answered without hesitation, all her previous doubts washed away by the journey they had taken together. "Yes, to all of it. To you, to Emma, to our family." As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, a smattering of applause broke out nearby. They looked up to find several park-goers smiling at them, strangers sharing in a moment of public joy. Among them was a familiar face, Martha from the shelter, her eyes wide with recognition and, Sarah was relieved to see, genuine happiness. "Sarah?" Martha approached tentatively after Alexander had kissed his new fiancée. "I've been hoping I'd run into you. I wanted to apologize for talking to that reporter. I never thought it would turn into such a circus. I was just so proud of how far you'd come." Sarah stood, still holding Alexander's hand. "It's okay, Martha. Everything worked out in the end." "More than okay from the looks of it," Martha said, nodding toward the ring now sparkling on Sarah's finger. "I always knew you were meant for wonderful things, even during your darkest days at the shelter." After a warm exchange of congratulations and promises to stay in touch, properly this time, Martha continued on her way, leaving the newly engaged couple to their happiness. "Should we call Emma?" Sarah asked as they began the walk back home, her hand securely in Alexander's, the ring catching the last rays of sunlight. "Tell her the news?" "I already told her I was planning to ask you today," Alexander admitted with a smile. "She helped me pick out the ring. Purple was her non-negotiable requirement." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than air. "Of course it was. So she approves?" "More than approves. She's already planning the flower girl dress she wants to wear, and she has some very specific ideas about having the rabbit princess featured prominently in the ceremony." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Sarah said softly. "She brought us together after all, her and Rosie." As they walked home through the gathering dusk, Sarah thought about the incredible journey that had brought her from that cold bench to this moment of perfect happiness, from homelessness to home, from loneliness to love, from despair to hope. It hadn't been an easy path, but every difficult step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, Emma returned from her sleepover, racing into the penthouse with barely contained excitement. "Did you ask her? Did she say yes? Can I see the ring?" Alexander scooped her up, spinning her around as she squealed with delight. "Yes, yes, and yes. Miss Sarah is going to marry us, just like we hoped." Emma wiggled down and ran to Sarah, who knelt to receive her enthusiastic hug. "Now you'll be my mommy for real," she whispered, her small arms tight around Sarah's neck. "I'll always be your Sarah," she replied carefully, mindful of honoring Caroline's place in Emma's heart. "And I'll love you forever, no matter what you call me." Emma pulled back, her expression serious. "I talked to Mommy about it last night in my heart. I told her I wanted to call you Mama Sarah. She said it was okay because she'll always be my first mommy, but you're my mommy now too." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she looked up at Alexander, who appeared equally moved by his daughter's words. "Then Mama Sarah it is," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. and I will do my very best to deserve that honor every day." Later, as the three of them walked to the park for an impromptu engagement celebration picnic, Emma skipping ahead with Rosie tucked securely under her arm, Alexander squeezed Sarah's hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. Sarah looked at Emma, then at the purple stone glinting on her finger, and finally at the man beside her, the man who had seen her at her lowest and still recognized her worth, who had trusted her with his most precious treasure, who had offered her not just material security, but the far more valuable gifts of love and family. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "This is better than any story I could have written." "Oh, I don't know about that," Alexander said with a smile, nodding toward Emma, who had stopped to watch a butterfly. "I think our rabbit princess might have a few more adventures left in her yet." "I'm counting on it," Sarah replied, leaning into his embrace as they followed Emma into the bright promise of their future together. The best stories never really end, after all. They just turn the page to a new chapter. And in the dappled sunlight of the park where their journey had begun on a cold winter day, three people who had found each other against all odds continued writing their story together, one filled with love, healing, and the kind of hope that only comes when compassion opens the door to unexpected possibilities. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.